This time last week, I was standing on the beach at ANZAC Cove. The clearest sea, the cliffs, the gullies and the ridges, it's all quite overwhelming. 8,709 Aussie soldiers were killed at Gallipoli. But now 10 times that number of Aussie tourists make their pilgrimage each year. And most of them about the same age as the soldiers who died there. It's a phenomenon, almost a rite of passage. Young Australians in search of our history and perhaps in search of ourselves. This is a place of the mind. I've never been anywhere that makes the imagination run wild as Gallipoli does. Throw some pebbles in these crystal clear Aegean waters and it becomes a shrapnel shower. Glance up at these towering cliffs and you see 1,000 diggers under fire. A fishing boat becomes a flotilla, what was then the greatest amphibious assault in military history. This place, Gallipoli, really is an awesome place.
These blokes probably got on the boat, they're feeling terrific, they're off on the great adventure. They were strong, healthy, good-looking chaps, going to have a good time, full of innocence. And they've hit this place and innocence is gone and it's never coming back. They've lost it forever. From that day on, they're old men.
Les Carline is the master storyteller. He's trodden all the trenches and stumbled all the gullies with all the ghosts. He's turned Gallipoli into a runaway bestseller.
Yeah, the ghosts are there. The ghosts are there. Sometimes you don't. But if you're alone on those hills, they're haunted hills, they really are. And you feel in a way you're a bit of an intruder because everywhere you walk, if you think about it, you're walking over bodies. They're just under the ground. You know, it's only a small area, it's 500 acres. You're walking over dead people.
On a clear day from the high ground, you can see where almost 1 million soldiers fought. In the gullies below, new life. The blossoms of another springtime camouflage for a moment the fact that more than 100,000 good men died here. Still, the reminders of war are everywhere. The monuments, the dozens of cemeteries, and of course, that infamous beach.
Well, you stand on Anzac Beach now, Ray, and it doesn't look much, but in 1915, it was like this incredible mining camp. The beach was stacked with stores, boxes of this, boxes of that, people carting stuff up the hill, and it had all the bustle of the mining camp, but it had a horror and a smell. All the soldiers talk about the smell of death, sickly, sweet smell of death. And it had a horror that made it something else again.
This is rare footage. Just a few minutes exist, the only moving pictures of the whole Gallipoli campaign. 5,000 men perished along this ridgeline here, many hundreds more in the gullies below. The generals called a truce in the middle of the battle so they could bury their dead. And they still tell the story around here of the 2 enemy soldiers who stopped for a yarn and a smoke. The Turk said, "Which country are you from?" And the digger replied, "I'm from Australia." "Australia? Why would you come all this way to kill me?"
Gallipoli is an Australian church, if you like. It's in the nature of a pilgrimage, it's in the nature of nostalgia, it's in the nature of finding out about an Australia that no longer exists and isn't coming back. And it's just one of those things where it seems to give out a siren call, and these young people want to go there, and you say to them, why are you here? And they have trouble telling you, except they want to be there.
Gallipoli is now a year-round tourist magnet. In the sleepy seaside village of Etchebat, where tractors park alongside Toyotas, TJ's is a backpacker's bonanza. This past year, 20,000 wandering Aussies and Kiwis have rested up here, and they've watched Mel Gibson run at Gallipoli, which TJ plays non-stop in the lounge.
Coming here for me is acknowledging and commemorating all the thousands of people who did die here.
Nobody is forgetting. In fact, the memory is getting stronger. A decade ago, it was a good day if a few hundred turned up for the dawn service. Last year, 15,000 young ANZACs hit the beach at Gallipoli. As the sun comes up next Thursday, they're expecting an even bigger roll-up, with swags and flags and flickering candles, and a tear to remember what we almost forgot.
I was dumbfounded. I just didn't think that, you know, an uncle went to war. He was only 18 and died here. It blew me away.
But you look at the bloke alongside him was 18.
18 as well. Mm.
Where were you most emotional when you wandered around here?
Definitely here.
Brendan Simpkins' great uncle died here at Lone Pine, and Brendan made the pilgrimage with some mates.
I was learning how to drive my first car when I was 18, you know, and he's here fighting a war. Incredible. I guess it's that mateship, that fighting side by side. Yeah, knowing that it wasn't just, you didn't sign up by yourself, you signed up with your best friend, and you were going off to see the world with your best friend. Yeah.
You're probably dying with your best friend.
And die with your best friend, yeah.
So they gave me a tin hat and they gave me a gun, and they marched me away to the war.
The Poms, when they saw all these bronzed figures on the beach, were astounded at them, you know, the height of them, the physical build of them, and the fact that they suntanned so easily and everything else. But that didn't last long. Then they got dysentery. Some of them were walking around with wounds they didn't get treated. They got lice. They got everything. And in the end, you saw, in the photos you saw, these faces had changed. They were haunted faces.
And their ghosts may be heard as they march by that billabong. Oh, come a waltzing Matilda with me.
Cameron Reynolds is here to dip his uncle's World War II medals in the sacred waters of ANZAC Cove, the same beach where his grandfather Alf jumped ashore in 1915.
Looking at here, this is where he spent his 21st birthday, and most of the year when he's 20 and 21, it's quite something to see where he was, considering what we do for a 21st now, and what, you know, but it wasn't much of a party or a...
But if we look at that, that could be you.
Yeah, it was very, very alike and similar, resembling exactly. Seems to be the same man in the picture.
Yes.
But luckily I didn't have to go through all this.
Alf Reynolds worked as a stretcher bearer, alongside the legendary John Simpson and his donkey.
So my grandfather would have started just over the hill here and walked up here every day?
Of course, definitely, from the rich.
Always under fire, the first task of the diggers was literally to dig.
You have rifle, you lie on the ground like this, and then you take your pick and shovel from your back.
Kanan Shelik's grandfather also fought here, but on the Turkish side. Kanan knows more about Gallipoli than just about any man alive.
Shooting and grazing, your mate does the same over there, he does the same. So you go deeper and deeper. In the night when you have time, you connect them, and then becomes front line like this.
87 long years later, it only takes a rainstorm to remind us of the horror that happened here. So, Kanan, this is a piece of bone.
Yes, it is.
Human bone.
Yes, I think so.
Yes. And a bullet here.
Yeah, it's a Turkish bullet, I guess. Yes.
I mean, your imagination can run crazy with the idea of an Australian being shot by the Turks here, and here's the bullet that killed him.
Yeah.
How do you know it's Turkish?
Because it's pointed. It's pointed. Australian one's round. Turkish one's pointed like this.
So is this, what's this one?
This is Turkish again. This is Turkish.
And this is
Australian.
So
yes.
that's the Australian one.
But still, you come across millions of bullets and millions, of shells were used here in Gallipoli.
For Australians, probably the most famous battle of the Gallipoli campaign occurred at a place called the Neck. Call it suicide, call it murder. But within a few metres, in a few minutes, there were 300 young Australians who were lying dead out there. Now, the Turkish machine guns were just over there, and yet over the top they went, wave after wave. Probably because of Peter Weir's film, what happened here at the Neck has come to symbolise the very essence of Gallipoli.
The Neck is an incredibly sad battle because it was just a total waste of two regiments of light horse. They had no hope. They were running straight at machine guns. 4 lines of them went. After the first line went, it was obvious the other 3 were going to get wiped out. Some of them didn't get 10 yards out of the trenches.
There's something quite surreal about Gallipoli, where shepherds can serenade sheep with flamenco music in pastures soaked in blood. Now remember, we killed almost 60,000 of their young men. What fascinates and puzzles Australians who visit today is the respect and the hand of friendship the Turks offer us.
It was one of those wars where, God help us, they were trying to kill each other all the time, but it did have an honour that you seldom see in a war. There were no civilians involved, it was just soldier against soldier. I think Gallipoli, funny as it seems, is Australia's greatest monument. It's not in Australia. Here we are, in this strange place, in a country we, in 1914 and 15, in a country we knew so little about, and we're fighting these people, the Turks, we knew so little about, and we didn't really have any beef against them anyway. And here, in this strange, hard-to-get-to spot, here's the biggest memorial Australia's got in another country, and that's probably why so many young people go there.
Right now, they're polishing up the Australian monument at Lone Pine. They're building seats for 16,000 visitors. And down at ANZAC Cove, they're mowing the lawn for the big dawn service.
Here in this country of ours, you the mothers who sent their sons from faraway countries, wipe away your tears. Your sons are now lying in our bosom and are in peace. After having lost their lives on this land, they've become our sons as well.
It's like they're still here. They're still wandering around, and you come here not to look at the graves, but to visit them.
Everywhere you walk in Gallipoli, you're intrusive. You sort of feel, yeah, you're treading on someone's soul. You're going to a place you really shouldn't be. But you've got to go to that place to understand it.
It's just a word, but it means so much. ANZAC. You only have to sit here and say it, and you feel that surge of national pride. So imagine what it's like to actually be there, where it all happened. To walk in the footsteps of the original ANZACs on this, the 90th anniversary of the landing at Gallipoli. For Peter Harvey, and for thousands of Australians, it's unique, almost spiritual.
You really can't explain this place, not logically anyway. For Australians, Gallipoli is all about emotion and sacrifice and the recognition of people who were truly brave. And the astonishing thing is this: an event that's almost 100 years in the past continues to compel increasing numbers of young Australians to come here, pilgrims of the soul, searching for the place where our notion of Australia's true identity had its real beginnings. courage, humanity and the spirit, and in many ways it was the making of a very young Australia.
Every nation needs a foundation myth, and Gallipoli turned out to be ours. These men who went ashore on the wrong beach in a hopeless position, and they were literally caught defending cliff ledges up on the escarpment there, and somehow they endured. They hung on there when they had no right to for 8 months.
Les Carlyon wrote the book Gallipoli, which should be compulsory reading for every Australian student.
I think people see it not as a defeat so much, but as a saga of endurance and courage, and above all hanging on in terrible circumstances. And the fact that it also happens to be a defeat, we don't seem to worry about too much.
We were just into our teens, like so many of the boys who lied about their age to get here.
Gallipoli, 4th of October 1915. Dear Mother and Father, things are just the same here. The Turks are still about 70 yards away from us. We have been in the trenches about a month now, so we are more used to it. Don't worry about me, as I am doing splendid over here. Write soon, as every letter is welcome here. Your loving son, Jim.
This is my first time to Gallipoli, but really, I've been seeing this place all my life. An episode of Australian history that's been unavoidable right from my earliest days at school. In fact, it was about the one piece of Australian history that was taught at school in my day. I think we learned more about English kings and queens than we did about the things that really mattered. And why were Australian troops here at all? Well, because we were doing our bit for Mother England.
Gallipoli was attractive to politicians in England because they saw it as a way of getting at Germany from behind.
By the great adventurer Churchill.
Who saw it as a way of shortening the war. What we know now is that it was never, ever going to shorten the war.
The odds against the campaign succeeding were colossal.
They didn't have much chance because here already 100,000 Turks were deployed. You lie on the ground like this.
Canon Celik has spent most of his life researching the Gallipoli campaign. His great-uncle fought here, on the Turkish side.
If you want to invade this country, you need at least 3 times, 4 times more men to do this.
To make it worse, the Australians were facing soldiers determined to defend their homeland to the death.
One of the misconceptions of Gallipoli on the British side has the taint of racism about it, in that the assumption before the landings was the Turks will see the Union Jack and run away. Well, they saw the Union Jack, they didn't run away. They fought very, very well. They never looked like running away.
They were hit with bad luck almost from the very start. The landing boats, for some reason, drifted north away from where they should have landed, which was a fairly gentle sloping beach, and ended up here, ANZAC Cove, just about the worst place on this coast that anybody could have picked.
Once you got up and started to get into those hills and cliffs and ravines and that terrible country, it got very, very hard.
Dear Gladys, I will tell you a little of the fight. It is not pleasant, and that is the reason it ought to be forgotten. We were separated after landing, and we made our way to the firing line. It was awful. Men were dropping like flies. Others were rushing back, some crawling, others dragging the poor devils who could not walk. And blood, I never thought there could be so much of it.
We ended up, if you like, in this siege position in about 400 acres around the edge of this escarpment. That's where we hung on. We were so close to the Turks, we could hear them talking, we could hear them coughing, they could hear us.
You don't really get a handle on just how small, just how intimate this whole battlefield was until you come to a place like this. This road now runs along what was no man's land. The Turkish trenches were there on this side of the road, the Australian trenches there. You can almost stretch your arms out and touch them. And that's the way they stayed for 8 months, shooting and fighting and living, able to talk to each other when they weren't killing each other.
The fighting at Lone Pine was essentially subterranean. It was underground. It was like something from Dante's Inferno.
The battle for Lone Pine went on without a break for 4 days and nights, hand to hand, bayonets and bombs. 7 Victoria Crosses won, and the worst was still to come. The Battle of the Neck.
Dear little wife and Kitty, I seem so far away from your war. I do not want to speak about the war. It's horrible. If I let myself think too much about it, my nerves would go. Have seen and done things I want to forget.
The attack on the Neck would go into legend for all the wrong reasons. Immortalised in Peter Weir's film classic Gallipoli, the charge was to be in broad daylight, 4 waves of 150 men each.
It's pouring back into the trenches, sir.
Think about what was going on in this trench, this precise spot, 90 years ago. A lot of young Australian soldiers, most of them very frightened, all of them very excited, waiting for the order to go over the top, to charge against the Turkish lines, the Turkish machine gunners who were just 50 metres away where that line of trees stands today. And at the very last minute, the Australians were told, empty your rifles, throw the bullets away. This was to be a bayonet charge. The plan said it was to be a fight to the death with cold steel. If you can call such a monstrous act of stupidity a plan.
I was in the first line to advance, and we did not get 10 yards. Everyone fell like lumps of meat. All your pals that had been with you for months and months, blown and shot out of all recognition. I was really awfully lucky, as the bullet went in just below the shoulder blade, round by my throat, and came out just a tiny way from my spine.
Of the first 150 men, almost all were cut down before they'd gone 10 paces.
Only 10 yards or 8 yards furthest they went in the first charge.
Just
most of them, most of them fell back into the trench. In the second attack, again it was useless. Again they were shot to the ground.
In the film version, an Australian officer pleads with his British commander to call off the attack.
You are to push on.
It's cold-blooded murder.
I said push on.
But the ugly truth is, it was one of our own, Australian Lieutenant Colonel John Antill, who refused to call off the attack.
He was sitting in a dugout there.
Mad Bull Antill, they called him.
Yeah, he is the man actually blamed for this, attack.
Massacre.
Yeah, and he said the attack must proceed.
One young trooper, Harold Rush, turned to his mate. "Goodbye, Cobber," he said. "God bless you." You can find the words on his headstone today. Then, as Charles Bean, the official war historian, records, the 10th Regiment went forward to meet death instantly. Surely, you think, the madness must end here? But no. The 4th wave is ordered out, and another 150 men hurl themselves towards the enemy, to be destroyed.
At first, here and there, a man raised his arm to the sky or tried to drink from his water bottle. But as the sun of that burning day climbed higher, such movement ceased. Over the summit, the figures lay still in the morning heat.
Watching the attack was the legendary Turkish commander Ataturk, whose statue still commands these heights. Ataturk claims he saw something which, if true, is shattering.
It's not in Australian history books, but it's in Turkish. Ataturk says in his memoirs, he was right on top at artillery observation post watching the charge, and he says, I could see officers with stick forcing
the men out?
Yes.
So that's something that isn't taught in Australian history books?
Yeah, it's not in Australian history books.
No,
and
it should be. If this story is true, it shows no lack of courage by these brave young men, just a refusal to accept the madness that ordered them to certain death.
How any of us are alive today beats me. I was shot with a poisoned bullet and had to lie up in the hills for 2 days before they could get me down to the beach. I will never forget the agony of that ride over the hills. I was put onto one of the boats where they took my leg off.
Apart from horrific episodes like the neck, the battle quickly becomes a grim stalemate, each side dug in. Ridges change hands 4, 5, 6 times in bloody hand-to-hand fighting. Hundreds of bodies left unburied.
It was essentially a case of, grabbing 10 yards here and losing 10 yards there.
The Australians hung on as though they'd been carved into the rock. They couldn't go forward, but they wouldn't retreat. And so it went on for 8 long months. Then winter. The British High Command acknowledged the great adventure was over.
The withdrawal was probably the most brilliant thing militarily that was done at Gallipoli. To get all those tens of thousands off at ANZAC without the Turks realising what was happening was something like a miracle.
And so they left. The Australians, the New Zealanders, the British, silent, exhausted, and for some, an abiding sense that it had all been for nothing.
We were all living in the past. The future did not exist anymore. It was so very far away, and the past so near, so fresh in our minds. I imagined all my pals were with me as they had been on the day we landed. We'd been a motley crowd, full of hope then. Our colonel had told us the eyes of the world would be upon us. The eyes of the Turks certainly were, but the rest of the world forgot us.
Perhaps the world did forget, but now we remember, and the legend has just continued to grow, until today, this tiny corner of a far-off land has become part of the Australian heart, part of our nation's soul.
The story you're about to see will change history and force the experts to rewrite the story of Gallipoli. You see, for all that's been reported about the ANZAC campaign, there's one rather glaring omission, and it's about the most significant part of the whole operation, the landing itself. Who were the first Australians ashore? Official accounts say that 1,500 infantrymen from the AIF's 3rd Brigade made up the first wave. But tonight we can reveal that the first men to set foot on Gallipoli were 150 Australian Army engineers, sappers as they're called, who until now have never been recognised. In suburban Canberra, this increasingly cluttered house has become the headquarters for Catherine Job's grand obsession. An obsession to recognise 150 forgotten ANZACs. with what you've discovered, are you challenging our ANZAC history?
I'm not challenging history, I'm presenting history. This is true. This is what happened. This is their story. And if you deny them this story, then they don't have one. They're obliterated. They cease to exist.
They are the soldiers of the 1st Field Company of Australian Engineers, young men from New South Wales who were airbrushed out of the official military records, but in fact were in the very front row of Gallipoli history. It's about these engineers now finding their rightful place in our ANZAC history, isn't it?
It's about their story being told. This is the engineers, the 1st Field Company engineers, and that their heroics as part of the history of what happened on that day and subsequently.
The formidable and forthright Catherine Jobe was an ABC journalist for many years. But now, there's only one story she wants to tell.
Absence of evidence is now being turned into evidence of absence. And their story is being not just forgotten, but it's gotten to the stage where it is being denied.
Catherine Jobe's quest actually began 3 decades ago with a simple aim to find out how her charismatic great-uncle died at Gallipoli.
He was the tall, handsome, blue-eyed, laughing, joke-cracking life of the party that everyone loved. Everyone just loved him.
Cleve Page loved adventure and had been one of the first to sign up in 1914. He joined as Sapper number 70, was sent to Egypt for military training, then on to Gallipoli, where he was killed on the day of the landing. But there were always conflicting reports about his death. What story to believe has intrigued 3 generations of Catherine's family for the best part of a century. But it gets even more confusing. The family always knew Cleve was an army engineer from New South Wales, and they believed he was one of the first to land at Gallipoli. However, the experts told them they were wrong.
And the answer was immediate. No, there were no New South Wales units in the Dawn landing. No, your family's got the story wrong. Everyone wants an ANZAC hero, you know, so it's not surprising that these things are made up.
The official history of the Gallipoli landings by renowned historian Charles Bean makes no mention of 150 engineers. He says the very first ashore were all infantrymen from the 9th, 10th and 11th battalions of the 3rd Brigade. Did you doubt your family's story, their version of Cleve Page and the way and how he died at Gallipoli?
At an intellectual level, you have to, because you have to go with the evidence. And if all the experts said that they weren't there and they weren't in any of the history books, then clearly something was wrong. And I wanted to know where they were. If they weren't there, where were they?
So, like any good journalist, Catherine started searching for the truth.
1st Field Company engineers, you know, ANZAC engineers, 25th of April 1915.
By digging in the digital world for original archives, not rehashed history. Catherine's first breakthrough was finding and then interpreting the original battle orders for the Gallipoli landings. And hidden away in the fine print, undiscovered by so many others, was the proof.
They were there.
Lost in history for all this time, but there was the record.
It said my family hadn't lied, you know, but they were there.
Not only were they there, as it turns out, the humble engineers were in the very front of the first boats carrying the infantrymen. But when the official records were written by the commanding officers, all infantrymen, the engineers were overlooked. Brigadier Wayne Budd is the head of our engineering corps today.
It's a fabric of the story that's never been seen before, and it actually allows you to see how the employment of engineers unfolds in the fog of war.
Catherine now had enough leads to dig even deeper.
And up came a 1st Field Company engineer reference. And it wasn't on any official site, it was on some bloke's private website. And it was a diary. It was an ANZAC diary of a 1st Field Company engineer. His number was 53. Now my heart leapt. Cleve's number was 70. They had to have known each other.
No sooner did we come into view of the enemy when they opened out with a very deadly fire. One of my pals, Cleve Page, was hit in the head, killed stone dead. He dropped at my feet, and I vowed vengeance on his slayers.
These are the words of Tom Drain, sapper number 53 and best mate of Cleve Page.
He made your blood boil, and then that is the time you get
faithfully recorded in his war diary and read by his great-grandson Andrew.
He wanted people to know what happened to his mates. And I think that if he was here today and knew that his words had helped Catherine understand what happened to Cleve, I think he'd be very, very happy about that.
Tom Drain's diary answered the question of how Cleve Page died. At the instant, his feet touched the Gallipoli shore. But it still wasn't enough for Catherine. She continued searching and eventually found over 30 original diaries and letters from First Field Company engineers. This jumps out at me right here, though, these words of the hell that it must have been. It was just like swimming into death, and I must have had a guardian angel over me then. I had no wish to go through the same thing again.
Yeah.
Until now, all these words have been hidden family records, all proudly detailing being the first to land at Gallipoli, contradicting the long-accepted history. But what you found in all of this, the diaries and the letters, a couple of dozen sources, is the same story.
What sticks out, the more you read them, that they are consistent. They tell the same story.
The level of detail that has come out of Catherine's research about who they were, I mean, personally who they were and what they did that day has been phenomenal in terms of telling a more complete picture of what happened on the very first day at the Gallipoli landing.
But the big question was, why were the sappers not only in the first boats to land, but seated in the very front of those first boats?
It's just unbelievable what he went through.
Catherine found the answer in New Zealand with 90-year-old Jack Moore. Gee, so when you've opened up that trunk full of all of that history and all of your father's life at war, that must have been incredible.
I just couldn't believe it that one person could have done so much.
Jack's dad was a Kiwi who signed up with the engineers in Sydney in 1914. And like Tom Drain, he never stopped writing about his hell at Gallipoli. We were lucky, we wondered. Would there be any Turks? Then, crack. Every man's heart gave a jump. I know mine did. Then crack, crack, a few seconds, then a continuous volley, which in turn was added to by the vicious, spilling cracking of machine guns with the zip, 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 as the bullets hit the water like a shower of red-hot coals. Jack Sr.'s account of the landing is an extraordinary piece of writing, and remarkably, he also took photos. Together, they help answer the big question. Why were they the first to land at Gallipoli?
They were charged with ripping down the barricades of barbed wire and that they assumed the Turks had put on the beaches.
So that's why they were in the first wave, so that they'd get to the beach first to clear the way for the infantrymen.
And for that reason they were all issued with a coil of rope and a heavy grappling iron to grapple with the barbed wire and pull it out of the way so to clear the way for the other troops to land.
Jack's father, who was known as ANZAC Jack in fact, survived the Gallipoli campaign and was decorated for his service and bravery in World War I. But the trauma of war was too much, and he took his own life back in New Zealand when his son was just 4 years old.
He must have been a complete blank at the time. The suicide note that he wrote said, "My brain is going."
And that's all he wrote. My brain is going.
That's all he wrote, yes. Anyway, that's life, isn't it?
It's hard for you, isn't it? Because your dad lives in these letters and all of these memories, but in your memory, you were such a young boy, you don't even remember him really.
Well, I haven't discussed it with anybody the way I've discussed it with you today, so it is, quite traumatic at times.
Catherine.
Andrew, at last.
Back in Tom Drain's hometown of Forbes in New South Wales.
And to think the last time our two families met, it was on the shores of Gallipoli.
His great-grandson Andrew and Catherine are meeting for the first time.
Now, Cleve and Tom were mates. Do we have a photo?
That's Cleve.
Cleve there, and here's your great-grandfather
That's him for
in
sure.
the front.
The diary and this wonderful memorabilia have always been precious to the Drain family.
Best things I have here is this, which is P.E. Drain's dog tag.
But they could never have known what was tucked away in a box would help rewrite our ANZAC history.
So you're holding in your hand something that was at Gallipoli?
It was there, yeah.
At that time?
It was on that beach.
Yeah.
Catherine Job's work has certainly polarised war historians and questioned the official record of the Gallipoli landings. Thankfully, she's found an ally in Brigadier Wayne Budd.
It's a matter of due recognition, isn't it?
I think it's fantastic that these young sappers at that landing can get the recognition for the work they did with the infantry. And Catherine's research and story is just great for those young men to have their history recorded, for the families of those young men to see over time that story has endured, and for the Royal Australian Engineers to be able to read that story and be proud of the achievements of their predecessors.
Tom Drain returned to his beloved Forbes after the war and got on with life.
Died at the age of 55.
But his Gallipoli experience was never far away, and he gave his sons the middle name ANZAC, a tradition these modern-day Drains, cousins, Leo, Hugh, Sam and Archie, also share. In Whangamata, New Zealand, Jack Moore still idolises his engineer dad, and every day he wishes he had been able to spend more time with him. Of course, sapper Cleve Page never made it home. He lies with his fallen mates at the Shrapnel Valley Cemetery. You'd like to think, though, he and those 149 other Gallipoli engineers would be proud of the passionate research of great niece Catherine.
Has it helped to be a little bit mad and crazy in your search for the truth here? Well, can I politely say, and thankfully for those young men who landed on that beach that morning, you have been obsessive about finding the truth about their stories.
Sometimes it felt like, you'd swear, that they were reaching out and saying, yes, we're here to be found. Please come and find us, keep going.
This is one ANZAC Day story you won't have seen before. A heroic tale from a war that killed 4 million and a battle that saved the day for the Allies. The war was Korea and the battle Kap Yong. Both these days just footnotes to history. And sadly, we've also overlooked 4 brave young men who held out against impossible odds in that crucial moment of the war. Diggers who fought back wave after wave of enemy attacks and survived the most ferocious hand-to-hand combat imaginable. Yet few Australians have ever heard of them. And now, 50 years later, only 2 of those diggers are left. So here's your chance to remember and applaud the forgotten heroes of Kap Yong. On the eve of ANZAC Day, 56 years ago, 4 Australian diggers fought an heroic rearguard action.
This is us, boys! Here they come! Let them have it!
Outnumbered, outgunned, the Korean War was in the balance.
Right flank!
They confronted wave upon wave of Chinese soldiers.
There were Chinese everywhere, and they mounted attack after attack over the bodies of their
dead there than, and wounded.
Changed a bit in 50 years?
Yes, it has, Peter. It's, there are no trees, the shrubs, not even a blade of grass.
83-year-old Ray Parry is walking me up to the exact spot where he and his 3 mates were attacked by the Chinese. High up on a granite outcrop near the South Korean town of Kapyong, the name of the battle hardly anyone knows about.
Where did they come from, the Chinese, Ray?
From that, the first attack from that direction, the second one from over here, and the third one came from down here, and we were in a hell of a lot of trouble.
And where were you?
We were just down here.
The 4 of you?
Where you're standing, yeah. We were in here. It's pretty peaceful now, but it was hell on earth during that, the night of the 23rd, 24th, 1951.
We feel that our people, when they go to war, are first-class fighters. We all have laid on us today a duty to be prepared.
Prime Minister Robert Menzies committed Australia to fighting Korea just 5 years after the end of World War II. Now, communism was seen as the biggest threat to the West, and when communist North Korea invaded the South, our troops joined a massive UN force led by the Americans to push them back.
If we didn't fight commos there, we'd finish up fighting them back here. Well, that's what went through our mind. That's what we volunteered.
Did you think twice at all about going to Korea?
No, never hesitated.
Kevin Sims was 20 when he joined Ray Parry in the 3rd Battalion of the Royal Australian Regiment, 3 RAR. This 600-strong fighting force was straight into the thick of it on the front line. They fought throughout the bitter Korean winter of 1950-51 until they were finally pulled back to rest near a town called Kapyong.
And how nice was it for you to think, I'm going to have a few days off?
It was bloody wonderful. Yeah, it was great. The boys were quite happy with the thought that they're going to have a break.
Sounds like you were set for a good old Aussie piss-up.
Yeah. There was been probably finished up for something like that, yeah.
But the Chinese put an end to all that, launching their spring offensive on April 22nd. Its massive army smashing through the front line, heading straight for Kapyong. The first wave of more than 300,000 Chinese soldiers was coming down this valley, hell-bent on taking Seoul 60 kilometres that way. Now, 3 RAR took up defensive positions on the high ground just over there. They were battle-weary, but these 600 Australian soldiers were about to engage in the bloodiest, most ferocious fight of their lives.
They were very aggressive, and the only thing that stopped them was a bullet. There were no beg pardons, and they meant business, and we responded in kind.
The Australians were at the forefront of the Allied defence and were split into 4 companies. Ray Parry was dispatched with Kevin Sims, Leo Widborn and Heck Roberts to defend the rear of B Company's position.
Ray Parry and the 3 diggers who were with him held a really important position. They were part of B Company, which sat on the Long Island feature. It's a long, kilometre-long feature that locked down one side of the Australian position. And he was like the padlock that chained it all together. They sat right at the back, making sure that nobody could sneak round and come up off the back slope towards the back of their company position.
Nigel Steele is Chief Historian with London's Imperial War Museum. He's helping Australia's War Memorial create a major new exhibition about the Battle of Kapyong and Ray Parry's platoon.
They could hear the battle sweeping down the valley towards them, and they were waiting for it to come to them, and they knew it would come. And so you have to sit and wait, and the tension is there, and it builds up to the point where your moment has come, and you have to look inside yourself and find the strength of character to match it, and that's what they did. And I think that is why they stand as a symbol, not just for this battle, but the whole of the Australian forces in Korea, and perhaps the whole of the Australian forces. It was their moment. It was the time when they had to stand up and be counted.
They're coming for you, you know that. You're not going to miss out.
There was 4 of you.
Yeah.
How many Chinese were coming at you?
Well, they kept coming, it'll be a couple hundred.
Not to enemy! Half-life!
At approximately 4 a.m, the 4 diggers were attacked by the first wave of Chinese.
We stopped the first attack, and then we waited. We knew there was going to be another one, but we didn't know just from which direction it was going to come, and that they were going to mount another attack, that was for sure.
It's not the sheer weight of numbers, it's the persistence. The first group come and you get rid of them, you shoot them down, and then the next group comes, and then the next group comes, and you don't know how many is coming, and all the time you know your ammunition's going down and down and down, and when are they going to stop?
Then, just before dawn, disaster strikes. Heck Roberts' Green gun jams.
Anything's jammed!
Minutes later, a Chinese soldier charges at them from behind with a submachine gun.
How the fellow missed me on. I'm very pleased he did.
Right behind you, mate!
He was firing when I swung around, and as I was swinging around to take care of him, he'd walked another pace. And then I squeezed the trigger, and I fired a burst of 3 rounds which hit him in the chest, and he just fell, and his arm, right arm, oh, not his arm, but his hand was on top of me. You know, it fell onto my part of my body.
It's been said the fate of the Korean War rested in the hands of these 4 men.
It would be quite reasonable to say that at that particular time, at that particular attack, on that night, for a while, the whole war depended on them holding their position. It's like a cascade, because if they go, the whole position would start to crumble away. So they absolutely have to sit there and stick it out for the rest of the night.
Why do you think you 4 soldiers held out the Chinese?
Determination. They weren't going to get us. We'd all swore that we'd die before they took us prisoner.
Ray, you weren't going to move no matter what?
No, we're ordered to stay here, and stay we did. And even under those poor heavy attacks, there's no thought of ever retreating or falling back.
After more than 24 hours of intense fighting, the Chinese offensive ground to a halt. Ray Parry's group survived 4 frenzied attacks, killing at least 23 Chinese soldiers and wounding many more. Ray won the military medal for his courageous leadership, and the whole battalion was awarded a US presidential citation, the equivalent of a Victoria Cross. Ray, do you ever think about the Chinese soldiers that you killed?
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes. Yeah. Yeah, it's difficult to forget.
It was such a ferocious war, wasn't it?
Yeah, indeed it was.
4 million killed?
Yeah, there's 4 million. That's a hell of a lot of people. Yeah, terrible.
"32 Australian soldiers lost their lives at Kapyong, 10% of all Australians killed during the Korean War. One battle doesn't tell the story of the whole war, which ended in a stalemate, but it does speak to the bravery and sacrifice of the Australians. At school, we're taught about the heroics of Gallipoli, Kokoda, Tobruk, yet the Battle of Kap Yong is barely known. It's no wonder they call the Korean campaign the Forgotten War. But the men who fought here can rightly stand alongside all the diggers that have served in our most famous campaigns.
These great moments of Australian history, where you get Gallipoli, you get Pozieres, then you get into Longtan in Vietnam and you go back into Tobruk, and all of these battles which come together, this is one of those moments. This is where you can see the strength of character of Australia coming out through their soldiers.
Of the 4 soldiers in Ray Parry's group that fought off the Chinese that night, only 2 are left, Ray and Kevin Sims.
Yeah, mate.
Bloody hell. Oh, mistake.
Been so long.
So anyway.
They went their separate ways after returning home from Korea, Ray to Perth, Kevin to Bendigo, Victoria. Today is their first meeting in over 50 years.
Oh dear, hang on.
How do you reckon he looks, Kevin?
Oh dear, he looks bloody terrific. Bloody hell, playing
Look pretty good yourself. You're a lot younger than I am.
Ray, I've noticed you guys haven't really let go of each other. It's an embrace and it's a...
Yeah.
That's mateship.
Anzac Day is set aside so that old soldiers can once again have their time in the sun, and the rest of us don't forget them or their fallen comrades. So on Wednesday, spare a thought for the more than 17,000 Australian men and women who served in Korea. Remember the Forgotten War and the battles like Kap Yong for their sake and ours.
One digger said after that battle, "At last I feel like an Anzac, and I imagine there are 600 others like me."
Yeah.
Did he imagine right?
Yes, yeah, that'd be right, yeah.
Did you feel like an Anzac?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I do.
Ashley Vines is like most other 21-year-old Aussie men. He loves his sport and has big dreams. Of course, a century ago, he would have been on his way to Gallipoli, which is exactly what his great-grandfather, Ashley Vines Sr. did. He would be in the second wave to land at Gallipoli on Anzac Day 1915. You'd think it's the sort of story that would have been well told down the family line. But for nearly a century, it was kept a secret until an incredible chance encounter. They could be our sons, our brothers, our mates. Just imagine them a century ago as brothers in arms. One day leaping for a mark, and the next dodging bullets in a trench. The thought burns deep for 21-year-old Ashley Vines, who bears the name of one of those soldiers in Gallipoli, his great-grandfather. In 1914, Ashley Sr. joined a special unit, the Public Schools Company. They were schoolboys 1 minute, Anzacs the next. Landing on day 1 at Anzac Cove, when blood soaked the water and mighty cliffs stood in their way. The day that war took revenge on their wild imaginations. The Public Schools Company was actually a private schools company. Students from the elite schools of Victoria came together. They were young boys, really, their final years of school just behind them. And it was a roll call of high achievers, school captains and duxers, prefects, cricket and football captains. You can only imagine how they felt, imbued by the best education, knowing nothing but success. How could they not go and whip the enemy?
He would have walked those same steps himself, and I find that rather remarkable.
4 generations of Vine's boys went to Melbourne's Scotch College. Today, the 2 youngest, Ashley and his dad Richard, are on a mission to walk in the steps of the original Ashley Vines. School records show he was a top athlete, a first 18 footballer, and the captain of cricket.
We subsequently found out that he was actually the vice captain of the school in 1910, exactly 100 years before I was announced as vice captain, which is amazing, yeah.
We called in top ANZAC historian, Dr. Michael McKernan, to explain what happened after Ashley and his mates left school.
Initially they thought, well, let's stick together. Well, boys from Scotch, boys from Melbourne Grammar, boys from Xavier, etc. Why don't we go into form a public schools company and we'll fight together? And Scotch boys were in it, as indeed was your grandfather, your great-grandfather.
Yeah, it's amazing the impact that war has.
The impact was immediate. The announcement came on a Saturday as Melbourne Grammar played footy against Xavier at the MCG.
The news of the war got to the ground, they stopped the game and thought, what do we do? I mean, what happens now? There was something much more important or, you know, that just took their minds completely off their footy.
The public schools company numbered 119 men. They joined 21,000 Victorian recruits at Port Melbourne. Today, the remnants of Prince's Pier rise like tombstones. We all know now that the first Australians arrived before dawn at the wrong beach and that the enemy was waiting. Ashley Vines and his public school company mates were in the second wave of landings. They would have seen the dead and wounded being ferried out as they were coming in. And it would have been clear to Ashley Vines that this was a mission not going to plan. Ashley, you're not dissimilar to your great-granddad's age. Can you imagine what that must have been like?
No, I can't really, to be honest. I couldn't even imagine, thinking about getting off a boat with all of these other Australians and almost facing certain death.
In the pandemonium, Ashley Vines, the elite sportsman from Melbourne, is shot.
He is severely wounded. He loses the sight of an eye. An artery is severed. He's probably going to die.
But then a mighty stroke of luck. An officer from another unit gets to him. Captain Alan Vowles, and he remembers Ashley. They'd been to Kew Primary School together.
It's so coincidental, isn't it? He happens to be in the same little part of the battlefield, remembers him, recognises him. Oh, you must be Ashley Vines. Can I help you, mate?
They're in the thick of battle. The hill they're on, known as Baby 700, and Alan Vowles, suffering wounds himself, begins hauling Ashley back down towards the beach.
You can get the distance from here, you can see how far he had to go. And he must have looked awful because he's lost so much blood.
So begins 5 painful hours, up and down ridges and ravines. 5 hours of blood, bravery and bullets. Vines and Vowles, who probably sat next to each other in roll call as young boys, now fighting for survival.
I'm absolutely gobsmacked that Alan Vowles and your granddad and great-granddad did that.
Yeah, it's incredible.
I mean, I look at that and I go, really? My
How
gosh.
did that happen?
Yeah. It must have been just extraordinarily hard work.
Nash, is it what you imagined?
No, it's not. But I didn't envisage this at all. It's this type of terrain just seems impossible. To now see what Alan Vowles did in terms of helping Ashley down to the beach, it just makes that story that much more immense. Yeah.
At last, they reach the relative safety of ANZAC Cove. They were
Serendipity about it. Now, it's not quite coincidence. Here we are 100 years later, and this story, Alan is, finally recognised for this. And the thread of life was so thin here 100 years ago, and nothing of this might have been for us.
Ashley Vines survived his injuries. He returned to Melbourne, got a science degree and became a teacher. He never spoke of his time in Gallipoli, and he never told his family that he owed his life to another man. It wasn't until 90 years later that the Vines family heard of Alan Vowles.
Robert. Richard. Good to see you, sir.
It was another extraordinary coincidence. Alan Vowles had a nephew, Robert, and by chance he met Bob Vines, Ashley's son. They met at a party in 2004 and they got talking.
And I said, his name wasn't Ashley, was it? Yes. And I said, and he wasn't blind in one eye, was he? And Bob said, yes, he was. He lost the sight of his eye in Gallipoli. So I then said, my uncle actually saved your father's life. so that was the moment, wasn't it?
That's an extraordinary thing to say to somebody, isn't it? To deliver that message.
That doesn't happen all that often, I suppose.
No.
One of the lost stories of Gallipoli finally made sense for Ashley's grandson and his great-grandson. But most importantly, his son.
When I found that I was completely up the creek.
You thought you knew it all?
I got a big surprise.
So you never asked him? You knew that he had this glass eye, you knew that he had been injured in the war, but you never asked what happened?
Well, I never really knew because he didn't discuss things with me.
Maybe the reason Ashley didn't want to talk about that terrible bloody Sunday lies in his yellowed service record, his trauma described as mental deficiency from shock. But he was luckier than some. 1 in 3 of the public schools company never came home.
History is really only made of individual stories. It's the collection of stories, and this is just one story. I'm feeling quite moved in the sense that, my grandfather never talked to my father about this. even though he was only here for a while, but he carried, I think, clearly a lot of trauma in his own strange way, and he never talked about it. That moves me a bit, that you could do something as significant as this and not share it.
Graham Mitchell has been searching for a very long time. In fact, most of his life. He's been looking for the woman who was like a grandmother to him. Sister Anne Donnell was of short stature but cast a long shadow. When the Great War broke out, Anne signed up for the 3rd Australian Field Hospital. And Anne was a mystery to Graham until he stumbled across a series of hidden diaries she kept throughout the war. They would change Graham's life and, a century on, lead him to a family he never knew existed. For decades, a dusty old box lay untouched in a house in Queensland. No one knew of the personal history it contained about the women of Gallipoli.
What was in that dusty old box?
A series of diaries. And I remember lifting the lid and looking at them and thinking, And then I started to read into them and I thought, wow, we've got some history here. And I got just that fraction excited about that.
Graham Mitchell from the Sunshine Coast uncovered the writings and photos of wartime nurse Sister Anne Donnell. The diaries bring an epic tragedy to life. Grim stories from a tent hospital near Gallipoli.
Must have been like finding treasure.
Yeah, absolutely. Good treasure, good Australian treasure. Found a treasured Australian woman.
And why were these diaries in your house?
Well, she was effectively my grandmother.
This laddie in the corner, I thought he should have some special care. And I told him he would be mine until his mother came. He gave me the loveliest smile. But next morning, his bed was empty. Just another one of many there that had made the supreme sacrifice.
Give me a thumbnail sketch of Anne Donnell.
39, from Cherry Gardens in South Australia. Enlisted World War I as a nurse and a very proud Australian.
She was a single woman?
Yes.
No children?
Well, my mum was given to Anne, so I suppose she had one.
After her war service, Anne Donnell took in and raised Graham's mother in remarkable circumstances. For Graham, it's always been something of a mystery. Now, he and his fiancée Jan will take the same journey Anne did from Fremantle a century ago.
So this was the starting point?
This was the starting point. This is where it started for her and where it finished for her. Tough.
She made a point every night of trying to find the Southern Cross until she couldn't see it anymore. She was definitely thinking of home.
Now we have left dear old free Australia behind, all our letters will be censored. Colonel Fiaschi impressed on us the mission of our work. There was no such thing as states between us, just a united Oz unit going forth, ready to give our best for the Empire.
Anne Donnell wrote in great detail about the voyage. She couldn't wait to get to the front line, which for nurses was here on the Greek island of Lemnos. It is so close to the coast of Turkey, the nurses could hear the battles raging in Gallipoli.
So she must have walked.
Yeah. This is exactly as it shows in the picture.
It is still the same.
Yeah.
Like many Australians, Graham and Jan had never heard of Lemnos Island. Its harbour was the jumping-off point for soldiers going to Gallipoli, 50 kilometres away. They sought help from the Greek locals and used Anne's old photos to retrace her steps.
It's extraordinary.
This was a soldier's funeral, but before long the death toll would rise into the thousands, and there would be no more time for funerals.
Thank you very much.
Most of the photos depict a desolate, windy slope by the harbour that became the 3rd Australian General Hospital. Graham and Jan were desperate to find it. They were driven to a deserted corner of the island, to an old farm with a few dogs and goats. No one lives out here in the relentless freezing wind.
The facilities were primitive, and that's really stretching the word primitive. It was horrible.
All that remains today is a rectangle of rocks that formed a foundation of sorts for the tents.
After all.
Look.
Here? Okay.
Yes, we can see that.
Elohim. It's here.
That's amazing. 100 years later.
It's amazing. That's incredible.
Here in hospital.
Yeah.
Yes. So the beds and soldiers.
The nurses, about 40 women in all, were piped ashore in early August 1915. Historian Michael McKernan says they arrived to find very little was ready for them. Tents and equipment came weeks after they did.
I think it's extraordinary seeing those photographs of people sleeping on the ground.
Oh, the hospital was designed to take about 1,000 men. I don't think it was ever less than about 1,200. So they had mattresses on the ground. So get a bed if you can, get a mattress if you're lucky, but otherwise there's a patch of ground over there, but somebody would have had to have cleared the rocks away.
And there was never enough food, unless, that is, you were a British Army officer.
Those officers who were not too far away were eating food that these nurses never got.
Oh, yes. Yes, that is right. And of course, some of them were invited to the officers' mess and saw for the first time in months fruit and chicken and meat, real meat, you know, not bully beef out of tins.
Well, I just don't know how anyone can sit down to a lavish meal knowing full well the nurses are on rations and are hungry, are starving.
They're on half rations. It's officially ordered that they will receive half rations, and you're tucking into a 5-course meal?
And yet, there's no sign of insubordination in these diaries. Just a stoic, factual account. The ANZAC women forged the values of compassion, resilience and resolve.
We all suffered with the cold terribly, and with all our warm clothing we couldn't get warm. Personally, I shivered for 3 nights without sleep, and the chilblains, agony. My 2 small toes were frostbitten. Then in the daytime, most of us just hobbled about. I heard one boy say as he saw me, "She won't stick the winter through." He exactly expressed my feelings.
Creating words in the middle of the night. as cold as they were. They wouldn't have got clothes like this.
No.
Bitterly cold and hungry and tired.
Why are you making me cry?
Tears?
Yeah. I just imagine the work that she did here, and that she got up every day and put a smile on her face, because her main thing was looking after the Australian soldiers. I couldn't have done it.
There's heaps of stories about guys, and I'm not taking away from what men have done at all. I wouldn't do that. But there's nothing, no, there's very little.
I think the point is that there were men and women at war.
Yep.
Yes.
And Danelle was one of them.
Yeah.
We don't often hear about the nurses who played such a crucial role in war, and Anne was one of those.
Mm.
She was the little pocket rocket.
Yeah.
Perhaps her toughest job was nursing young soldiers, only to see them return to the fight.
This morning, we heard the band playing. It was the 1st Brigade on its way back to ANZAC after a rest. We sisters gather up all the cigarettes and chocolates and tins of food we can and throw them to the smiling faces as they march by. We all know how in their inner heart they dislike going back to all they remember there. It makes us feel terribly sad.
She was a good woman.
She was a good woman.
Well, she's your grandmother, really.
I know. I'd love to have met her.
Well, I think you can almost say you have.
I think, Liz Hayes, you got it right on the nose. I think I did.
After Gallipoli, Sister Anne Danelle went with the hospital to the Western Front. Once, back in Australia, you'd think she'd choose an easy life. But Anne went to the frontier mining town of Kalgoorlie in outback Western Australia to work in infant welfare. It's extraordinary. I mean, from Egypt to Lemnos, Kalgoorlie.
She had love to give, and she wanted to give it to a child. Many children, in fact.
And it turns out that one of the children that she would want to give love to is your mum.
Yes. Yeah, and then a whole different story took off.
Graham's story, his link to Anne Danelle, can be traced back to here, the Karatani home in Kalgoorlie, where Anne Danelle delivered the baby who would be Graham's mum.
There's the stairs.
Yeah, I know that, but I don't know that actually...
Graham has never heard the full story. So you've been struggling to fill in the gaps, have you?
Yeah, I'd love to know.
To know how your mum came to be with Anne.
And who I am.
The story is that your mum came into Anne's hands because her mother, your grandmother, wasn't able to cope. She suffered severe postnatal depression.
Oh.
She was baby number 9.
I know she was from a big family.
And,
Wow.
And I think Anne's just simply, as a family friend,
was she?
Stepped up and saying, let me help you.
What a woman.
Yeah, exactly.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you feeling?
We discovered this from an uncle and auntie Graham never knew he had. So we took Graham and Jan to meet them at their home north of Perth.
Come and meet your family.
Hello.
Hello. Graham,
How are you?
This is your uncle, Horace.
There you go. Very pleased to meet you.
And his wife, Margaret.
Hello. How are you?
Graham.
Give me a hug.
Yeah. I've spoken to you on the phone.
Does that fill in some gaps?
Yeah,
perhaps?
massively.
Hi.
Lovely family.
Oh, thank you.
She's potentially changed your life.
No potential about it, Liz. She's changed me for the better. I'm a better man for knowing her.
Because?
Who she was, what she did, how she stood. She's a hero.
Goodbye, Lemnos. We take away many happy memories of you. I wouldn't have liked to have missed you, yet I have no desire to see you again.
John Harris, Jack to his mates, was the youngest Australian to fight and die on Gallipoli. But incredibly, his story has never been told. At just 15, he took a rifle and bayonet and charged at the enemy in the notorious Battle of Lone Pine. How young Jack got to Gallipoli is a tale of trickery and a bit of skullduggery. What happened here 100 years ago doesn't get a mention in the story of Gallipoli. A child who should have been playing with the other kids at school went to war instead.
Just visualise that little kid scrambling up out of a trench down there, and on those, spindly legs. I mean, a .303 rifle with a bayonet fixed would have been taller than him.
That little kid was Jack Harris from Cleveland Street Public School in Sydney. He was 15. Today, his great-nephew, David Cashin, is about to learn there was more than just boyish adventurism that lured Jack to war.
Look at the photo, he's a baby, isn't he, really?
That's baby
Crazy.
face. That is a baby face. When this boy went and enlisted, how come somebody didn't look at that face and say, "You're kidding"?
Well, that's a story we have to find out.
The story starts in Sydney's inner western suburbs, in Holy Trinity Anglican Church at Dulwich Hill.
Naught can separate us from the love of Christ, neither tribulation, nor distress, nor persecution.
Jack Harris and his parents sat in these pews to hear the fiery sermons of a clergyman, Irish-born Reverend Everard Deige-Latouche.
For I am persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor...
The preacher was desperate to swap his clerical collar for an ANZAC uniform.
Which is in Jesus Christ our Lord.
And he swept up young Jack in his holy crusade. Deige-Latouche saw the war more as a religious struggle between good and evil. He begged the Archbishop of Sydney to allow him to go and fight. The Archbishop refused, but Latouche went anyway and took young Jack Harris with him.
And so we have, amongst all of those older men, this kid who was so passionate about enlisting and fighting that he went and did it. He didn't just think about it or dream it, he actually did it.
Retired Army Major General John Cantwell fought in Iraq and went on to run the war for Australia in Afghanistan.
So, that's it. That's ANZAC Cove.
Oh, look at this place.
This is his first visit to Gallipoli. We've brought him here with ANZAC historian Dr. Michael McKernan.
Almost every person who landed on this beach, they were under fire for the very first time in their life.
They must have been petrified.
Well, when I first encountered enemy fire, the instinct to go forward is what compels you. Only later, if there is a later, do you have a chance to reflect and you see your hand shaking and you realise what you've just been through. Now, I'm a trained professional soldier. Well, these guys are just amateurs.
That's right.
They didn't come much more amateur than Jack Harris. To enlist, he said he was 18. Remarkably, his father Alfred sanctioned the lie and signed his consent. And just 7 weeks later, 15-year-old Jack was on the front line. A spectacular but deadly plateau with a single pine tree.
When he arrived here, surely somebody said, "You look pretty young."
Well, he does look like a little boy. And I can only assume that the diggers just cared for him, took him under their wing and perhaps attempted to keep him safe, but there was nowhere to hide.
On August the 6th, just 12 hours after landing on the beach, young Jack Harris was up in the trenches. The man who'd had him under his spell, Dij Latouche, brought him here to Lone Pine. By 3:30 that afternoon, a barely pubescent 15-year-old was now in the thick of the most ferocious battle Australians have ever endured.
Even though Dij Latouche had written to Jack's mum and dad vowing to protect him, he took Jack to the front line on the very first day.
I think this man was so determined to fight for God that he convinced the family that that was the right thing to do. But it gets worse, David. He fights his way into the front line. He insists that he and his men should be placed in it because he wants to die. Almost every man on the peninsula, the first instinct was survival. Nobody wanted to die, but this man did. Because through his death, Australia would be redeemed. He has written about this.
This is Dij Latouche.
That's this.
Yeah, that's
this is
him.
this man.
Yeah.
Right.
Your great uncle would not have been here, I don't think, if it wasn't for this man.
That's right.
That one's a bit hard to get the head around.
Yeah.
The question I've got is if this is his grave, where is the grave of John?
What an experience that young boy endured. He's just a kid, stepping over his fallen mates, stepping on his fallen mates because they were so thickly carpeted. And we grieve over 41 soldiers from Afghanistan. Well, they were losing that many, by the minute on some occasions in the First World War. So how does a young boy do that? It's quite humbling to think about.
This, David, is your uncle.
John August Emile.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll note that the tombstone, the headstone says that he's 18.
Yeah.
And that's a nice fiction, isn't it?
Yes, it is a big fiction.
The first news home to Jack's parents came in a blunt telegram. Harris missing, believed killed. Later, a Red Cross report said he'd been seen lying just outside the Turkish trenches, severely wounded. Then finally, his ID tag arrived. When that came home, they knew Jack wouldn't.
David, can I ask you how you feel with all this knowledge that your great uncle is here and he died here?
It's difficult to put it into words, to be honest. I mean, the last thing was I'm shaking from that.
Yeah, these are difficult stories to tell. You have a great uncle that should never have been here.
No.
He shouldn't have been here.
He shouldn't have been in this country, let alone in the ground.
Well, you will be saying goodbye, but with greater knowledge.
Well, I might be saying goodbye, but I'm taking a lot with me. A lot.
From the outset, the ANZACs and the Turks formed a warm respect for each other. They were all young men fighting someone else's. One Australian shared the strongest bond of all. Dr. Charles Ryan, quite incredibly, fought for both the Turks and the Aussies. And for one day at Gallipoli, he turned foes into friends.
The Turks just kept attacking and attacking and attacking in waves that cost them thousands of lives in single battles.
Dr. Charles Snodgrass Ryan.
Ryan, yes. My Australian hero, I say.
Dr. Charles Ryan was a senior medical officer from Melbourne and a keen photographer. At 62, he stood out. But to the Turks, there was something even more extraordinary than his age. The Turkish war medals pinned to his chest. Dr. Ryan had actually served with the Turks 40 years earlier.
In his youth, he had answered an advertisement in the newspaper. He was a doctor, he was studying in Europe, to go and fight with the Turks. And he did, and was very highly regarded. He showed great courage.
That now largely forgotten war was the Turks fighting the Russians at Plevna in 1877. And now, in 1915, here he was, doing the same job as an ANZAC surgeon, but sporting his Turkish medals.
And then he goes back to war in his 60s to fight the Turks, who he had previously served alongside. And to have him sort of appear on this battlefield must have been a surreal moment for the Turks, who were initially suspicious that he had stolen these medals from a fallen Turk. But then their tremendous reaction when they discovered he was, in fact, their friend.
Ending. At the end of the day, Dr. Ryan and the men from both sides returned to their trenches and the war resumed, but as enemies with renewed respect. Many men and women came home from Gallipoli, put their medals away and tried to erase painful memories by not talking about them. As we discovered tonight, these secret stories are now coming to light in amazing ways, like a message in a bottle washing ashore a century later. And before our story ends, one more chance encounter. In the 12 months it's taken to unearth and tell these stories, we've not been able to get over the flukes and coincidences. The way a Melbourne family discovered by sheer accident at a party how Ashley Vines owed his life to a schoolmate.
How are you?
The way two sides of a family could finally meet thanks to a nurse's diaries. And the hidden treasures. Until recently, the loved ones of 15-year-old soldier Jack Harris had just one faded photo by which to remember him.
That's all there is. That's it.
It turns out we've found a lot more. A secret collection of sad souvenirs, medals and letters has just come to light after yet another coincidence. A throwaway remark to us by the curator of Sydney's Hyde Park ANZAC Memorial, Brad Manera, revealed these hidden gems.
This collection sums up that naivety, that enthusiasm, and that enormous sacrifice, because the collection reflects his service, but it also reflects the desperate cost to his family. The letters are full of the parents searching for what happened to their son. You can feel the pain in those letters.
All this had been tucked away in a private collection. Now, Brad has just acquired it for the memorial. The collection includes young Jack's identity disc.
He was wearing it in that trench as they were fixing bayonets, as they were waiting for the whistle. The youngest Australian soldier killed in action in the First World War.
You would expect Turks would seek atonement from those like us. Anzacs invading their land and killing their sons. But old enemies are now our friends. And historian Halleck Orrell grieves along with us for Lance Corporal John August Emile Harris, the 15-year-old boy who died in a hopeless and failed campaign that has become etched in our national identity.
I hope that the Turkish soldier who killed this boy, I hope that he didn't see his face. You know, it's sad. I hope that it will never happen again.
These days, we're obsessed with the new. Everything's bigger, better, brighter than ever. So it's a comfort to know that one tradition endures, that the spirit of ANZAC lives on. And nowhere is it more robust than in Gundawindi, Western Queensland, where the kids have found a unique way to honour the fallen. They scoured the archives, researching the lives of the young men from the district who went off to fight and die in the First World War. Then set out on an emotional pilgrimage to France and Belgium, following in the Anzac's footsteps. A new generation of Australians remembering the old. This is a school excursion like no other. These kids have travelled from outback Queensland to the heart of Europe to see where 90 years ago an entire generation of young Australians, just like them, was lost. This will be a highly personal and deeply emotional mission.
Here, the one that's facing the gates, these are the lists of the people who died during World War I.
Their journey began a year ago back in Australia, in Gundawindi, a speck on the map west of Brisbane. Teacher Melissa Taylor asked her students to choose a soldier's name off the town cenotaph and find out everything about his life and death.
So who were these people? Were they husbands? Were they sons? Did they have sons themselves? We need to try and find out in our research, who were they? All around Australia, we've got...
They were farmers, butchers and bakers, country boys, lives from a century ago, about to take on a whole new meaning.
Try and pick a name and think about, well, what possibly did they do? Were they your age? Were they a bit older? Were they married? So you're going to become a part of the story and keep it going. So he's 18 years and 10 months old when he...
No, he's 17. I think he lied about his age.
He lied about his age, did he?
Each of the kids adopted a soldier,
By your last letter, you wanted to know.
searching for each man's story. It became very personal.
I think he was only like 22 or 23 when he enlisted, so really young.
And you can see the Rising Sun badge on him.
Inevitably, as time went on, they began to realise those soldiers were once just everyday kids like them. Teenagers who had no idea of the hell on earth that awaited them in Europe.
Like, he was 4 years older than me, and that's really hard to comprehend. Like, when you think about it, they're only just going to uni now or leaving school or so on, and you couldn't imagine even picking up a gun, firing at anyone.
That's the last letter that he wrote. That was on the 16th.
School captain Jack Lucas chose a farmer, Irving Thompson, who signed up with the 5th Australian Pioneers. He was just 17.
How old are you? I'm 17, the same age as Irving was.
Right.
He lied to get in.
Yeah.
Put down 18 as his age. It's just it gives me a reality check, because I'm planning things to do after I leave school and go into uni and stuff, and he just signed up to go to war.
The last time Irving Thompson's family saw him, he was pedalling his bike down to the station to go and sign up. Irving's little sister Nia, now 93, still lives in Gundawindi. Mrs. Woods, hello. She never met her brother.
I'm Jack Lucas.
She was born when Irving was on his way to France. Do you remember your mother talking about him?
Oh, all the time. I can remember as a tiny little thing, she was always crying when she got these letters.
When you hear Irving's letters, you know why.
We went out last night under heavy machine gun and artillery and rifle fire.
I can't be thankful enough for you giving me all this information on Irving, because it feels like I've got a story.
It's just incredible to go there because there's so many graves as far as your eye can see.
"93 years ago, Irving's journey to France took months on a troop ship. It took today's kids just 48 hours. They went straight to the old front line at the village of Fromelles, the first big battle for the Australians after Gallipoli. 2,000 of our diggers were to die here in a single night.
Irving and his platoon, they've probably been in this town walking down this street.
Well, that's true, isn't it? There's every chance that they walk down this road, march down this road to the battle.
So this is a picture of Irving's division in England before they headed out, and they all look pretty keen, but I don't think they really knew what they were getting themselves into. This is the day before the battle in the trenches. That's the German front line there.
These are the trenches, are they?
Yeah. I think this was taken on the night of the battle. That's the Australian line there, and you can see there's not that much gap between them.
What's this countryside remind you of?
It's almost like home, because there's no hills in home except for the one down the back street.
No hills meant no cover against German machine guns, yet the Australians went out in wave after wave. You can still reach out and touch the wreckage of that terrible night.
It's already been blown up.
Broken up there.
And it's filled. I want to know if it's German or like
So
Britain
do
or
I.
something.
It was almost a throwback to the American Civil War. Sort of, you know, two lines of men just standing there killing each other, except most of the killing was done by the Germans.
No one tells the human story of the war better than author Les Carlyon. What was the Battle of Fromelles all about?
What the generals thought Fromelles was all about was a diversion. The Battle of the Somme had begun down south. The idea was, we'll attack the Germans at Fromelles and tie them down there so they can't send reserves down south to the Somme. It's probably the most tragic night in Australian history, that night at Fromelles.
Irving Thompson actually survived that tragic night, but then he made a courageous offer to go out and bring in his dying mates.
And the next day on the 21st, he volunteered to go and collect the wounded and the injured. And it's a pretty brave thing to volunteer for it because they're still under fire.
You had literally thousands of Australians lying out in no man's land, in shell holes and other things, shockingly wounded, some of them.
It must have been absolutely terrifying for young blokes like Irving Thompson.
It's almost beyond, I think, our imagination. When you think flat land, totally exposed to German fire, and everywhere you look, there's a dead or wounded Australian. It really was one of the great horror shows of the war, and poor Irving was in the worst part of it, and of course that's where he was killed.
Irving Thompson's body was taken from here and buried in the next village, and that's where Jack is going now, to find Irving's grave and to read his eulogy.
I found him. Irving was killed on the 21st of July in the Battle of Fromelles, in which 5,000 and more Australians were killed. Many of the Allied forces had been wounded and laying in no man's land since the night before. Irving volunteered with the others to go out and bring them in. He was caught by a sniper's bullet in barbed wire, only 17 years of age. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
Another day, and for the kids of Gundawindi, another story of sacrifice by their district's finest. We're on our way to the small Belgian town of Messines. It's here, along this small forest pathway, that many of the Gundawindi diggers gave their lives as part of the 35th Battalion.
The 35th got very badly gassed in an area called Plug Street Wood. As they were going up to the start line, they got hit by gas shells, and they had very heavy losses there.
And this is the Plugstert Forest. The diggers had trouble with that name, so they called it simply Plug Street. It's here that so many of them died, groups of mates killed together by the same shell burst. And it's here, in this tiny cemetery, that they're buried together, their tombstones standing shoulder to shoulder. One of them was Private John Barker, a colliery train driver. He was 19, but looked so much older. When you look at that, how old would you say that bloke is at first glance?
30.
Shelby Thompson, who researched Private Barker, offered a reason why.
And like what he saw, I couldn't even imagine. Like sitting here, I can't imagine what they all went through. It's so beautiful at the moment. And to think it was so muddy and so noisy and so deadly. And there would have been like artillery everywhere, people everywhere. You would have like people lying dead everywhere.
With his experience in the coal mines, Private Barker may well have assisted in Britain's earth-shattering plan to take Messines. They kicked off the attack with 19 gargantuan explosions.
The British for some time had been tunnelling under the German lines. When the attack opened, they set off all these mines under the German lines. It was the greatest man-made explosion to that time. And it was heard in London. So if he was still alive then, he would have seen probably the greatest fireworks display the world's ever seen at that point.
John Barker's 35th Battalion helped achieve the main objective, They drove the Germans out of Messines, but the battle cost 26,000 casualties, half of them ANZACs. All the graves in this nearby cemetery are Australian, and here Shelby finds the resting place of John Barker. This is where it hits home.
Before us today rests a headstone of Private John Albert Barker of the 35th Battalion. John has not yet received an official service, nor has any of his family had the opportunity to commemorate his life here at his final resting place.
Now, at last, the eulogies that the families of so many of Gundawindi's lost sons have never had the chance to give.
It was a far cry home for the 26-year-old butcher who attended the Gundawindi State School. Private Donald Edward Boodle fought and died on this day, lest we forget.
In peace, sons bury their fathers. In war, fathers bury their sons. Today we are gathered together to commemorate a son of Australia, Thomas Newborn Bennett.
Walter won a few medallions throughout his years of serving in the war. These included a Star Medal, a British War Medal and a Victoria Medal. Walter was just one of the many men who fought for our country, for us today.
I am thankful for the great sacrifice that he made for his country, for my country, for our country, Australia.
It was such a moving ceremony, thinking that cemetery, they were all from around our district. And to all think that they all died there over like 3 days, they all died together, all doing what they thought was right, for their country.
They shall grow not old as they are left to grow old.
An 18-year-old kid can go to Gallipoli or France or Belgium and sort of think, you know, if I'd been born back 4 generations, I might be in the ground here. It's as awful as that. How many future Prime Ministers did we lose? How many university professors did we lose? How many famous writers did we lose? How many good people did we lose? The damage that did to Australia, you can't calculate.
At every stop, the kids from Gundawindi were reminded that while the war was eventually won, Australia's losses were beyond measure. They told the stories that lie in just some of these graves. But now they know there's so much more to tell.
Oh, I couldn't even fathom going into it. Like, I doubt any of my mates could either. That's the real stuff, that's in the trenches.
But if you had to for Australia, would you do it?
Oh yeah, you'd do it for Australia. You'd do it for these blokes if it came around again.
Yes, you would.
Known unto God. Simple and haunting words which mark the grave of an unknown Australian soldier. They pay tribute to a digger who made the ultimate sacrifice for our country. And they remind us of a family who never had a place to grieve, never really knew what happened to their loved one. Sam Riddler was one of the many young soldiers who disappeared on the battlefields of France in the First World War. For almost a century, he was missing in action. But now, 97 years after he vanished, an inspiring detective story has changed all that. And as you'll see, it means the world to Sam's family. At home in Yanchep on the windy coast of Western Australia, 90-year-old Ray Krakauer and his family have lived with a mystery. Whatever happened to Uncle Samuel, who never returned from the battlefields of France in the First World War? Sam Riddler.
Sam Riddler, yes. He did not have a known grave like thousands of other Australian diggers.
A veteran himself from the Second World War, Ray has made finding Sam a lifelong quest. He's always believed that his uncle's sacrifice deserved more than just a stamp on his file. Missing in action.
I'm an old soldier myself in World War II. I know what comradeship means. I know what a cobber is.
I've grown up with this. Any time I would have conversations with Dad, he would always integrate stories about the war. One way or the other, it's always been, well, it's really defined him.
The beauty and the silence of these fields belies the unthinkable horror of World War I. On this French soil, thousands of our young men were cut down. Some of those soldiers were lost forever in the muddy hell that was no man's land right here. And many were buried with no clue to their identity, leaving families no place to grieve. But thanks to an extraordinary quest, those diggers are finally being identified, and our ANZAC history has new stories to tell.
They deserve it. They deserve to have their names back. They deserve to have their identities and their stories.
Tim Lysett is a former cop. Sandra Plale is a sleuth of ancestry. They've spent 5 years forensically combing through archives and artefacts. And even old headstones to find clues. Anything to give names to those fine young men who sailed off to war full of hope, only to die as unknown soldiers.
These men weren't soldiers for very long, the majority of them. It was only a very short period of time. They had lives, they had families, they were people, they had personalities and characters. And we think it's important, if you can, is to try and also discover who they were.
You're making them human.
That's what we're trying to do.
I've always believed that every soldier has earned the right to live forever, and that it's up to us to see that that does happen.
The passionate crusade to identify the missing diggers starts in this village of Fromelles. The battle here was a bloodbath. 5,533 Australian casualties in just one night. It was carnage, a total military disaster, and is regarded even today the worst 24 hours in our war history. For most of the Aussies, it was their first ever battle, and they faced an overwhelming German force, including a young corporal named Adolf Hitler. Some of the diggers died behind enemy lines. The Germans placed their bodies into 5 mass graves in the village. The Allies had no idea until their astonishing discovery 6 years ago. 250 bodies were exhumed, but who were they? Matching their DNA to living relatives would be the key. So Tim and Sandra began building 250 family trees. Is this about the hardest police work you've ever done?
It's been hard. There's been some very difficult ones to we knew their stories were there. It's teasing them out of the records, and we're trying our best.
The Army provided a long list of the missing Australians from Fromelles, which was the starting point. One of the names was Private Samuel Riddler.
I actually found his photograph, and there was just something about his eyes. And when you look at those photos, and there was just something about Samuel. And
he was looking at you, do you think?
Yes, and it was me that contacted his great nephew.
Samuel. God.
Samuel was 41, older than most of his mates there. Do you know why he signed up?
Duty calls. Your country needs you.
To help with the identification, Ray was asked to supply a sample of his DNA. And he got a phone call back. It matched a body in the mass grave. His uncle Samuel was found at last.
Hi, darling, how are you?
Mum.
Ray and his daughter Lorraine Markwell were overwhelmed.
When Pop rang and said, they've found the remains, they've found these guys, I couldn't believe it. I just thought, I just couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
Quite remarkable.
Yeah.
Quite a remarkable feat in terms of technology.
The mass graves are empty now and the remains reburied in a brand new war cemetery in the village. Each time an identification is confirmed, the words "known unto God" can be replaced with a name, which is what's happened with Sam Riddler. Now, his nephew Ray would love nothing more than to sprinkle some Aussie dirt on the grave and see the special epitaph he requested.
We didn't forget your cobber.
They're good words. What would it mean for you to do it yourself?
I'd love it. I'd love it, but I'd love it. I couldn't do it. Yeah.
Your health prevents you now.
My health, prevents me. But my beautiful daughter could do it. Couldn't you, love? Couldn't you? Could you do it?
Well, they've actually invited me to go, which is just a fantastic thing. So...
No, how do you do it in French? Rub noses.
I don't know, I'll find out when I get there. But,
Fromelles is a tiny village near the Belgian border, and when we arrived it was fittingly cold and bleak. Our guide explained how the Germans took over the village for the entire war, so the locals had no idea of the burial pits that lay beneath.
They all came back in 1919 and they did not know what happens.
The villagers didn't know?
No, because when they came back in 1919, there were flowers and grass, so they did not see the pits.
There's certainly something when you stand here looking out at that field, and that's where Samuel lay.
and to just not know. It's the not knowing that would have been a terrible, terrible torment, which was appalling for his mother and those left behind.
It's a torment that also drives Tim and Sandra, because so far only half of the men from the mass grave have been named. To identify more of them means finding relatives who knew them, knew their stories, have their DNA. But as we see every ANZAC Day, it's a generation we're losing.
Our initial goal was to help find descendants and have them identified, but then you talk to the families, you talk to the descendants, and suddenly they all become human. And it's like I could, be having a beer with them now at the pub. It's like I know them,
Sometimes they say it's as if the soldiers are talking to them from the grave.
It's almost as if they're leading you to find the information about them. They want their stories told.
Like it was meant to be.
Well, I was never a believer in that kind of thing, but things have happened. I just put it, there are things that happen that I can't explain. Sandra believes it.
I've always said to Tim, and I will advocate it until my last breath, these boys control their history. You just have to look for the signs. So that's why I always know that these boys will have their story told.
Those stories are being told in the new cemetery. Each digger has been buried alongside the soldier he was found lying next to in the mass grave. Like the Wilson brothers and the teenagers who lied about their age to sign up.
Where are you?
And like Sam Riddler. Now, after 97 years, his time has finally come to be reunited with his family.
Oh, here he is. Oh my goodness. And we have not forgotten you, Cobber. It's just amazing. It's a beautiful, peaceful place.
It is, isn't it? And he can rest in peace. He has a name.
That's right.
He has his own headstone.
Yes.
And it tells his own story.
And he's not forgotten.
We have not forgot your collar.
That's it.
And Lorraine's certainly not forgotten her dad back in WA. She's about to give him a big surprise.
Pop, hi darling, how are you?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Now, sweetheart, you can't be here, obviously.
No.
But I can give you a guided tour.
Of where we are in the new cemetery. And let me tell you, the countryside is magnificent. I mean, she's pretty chilly here.
What can I say?
Well, so there we go.
Breathtaking.
It is. And I never would have imagined that it would be as moving, actually, as it is. Now here he is. He's located in row 4B. And there we are.
Yeah.
So there we are. Can you see? That's it.
Yeah.
I've got with me the jar of soil that you gave me from Uluru, from the heart of our nation.
Share it among the rest of them.
Yeah, I'll help you here.
Thank you.
There's
Thanks,
the soil.
Michael.
Why don't I make sure that Ray can see this?
Can you see this? So there it is. There it is, Pop. Okay. So we just put some soil here.
That's from the heart of Australia.
It is. The heart of Australia.
Yeah, we didn't forget your cobber. Thank you, my dear.
That's all right, darling.
Proud of you, love.
Well, it's a privilege. It's a privilege, and I appreciate it.
That's it, yeah, Samuel T. Riddler. Yeah. Yeah.
Pop, it's actually quite a beautiful resting place, and I felt that everything has been done with great reverence and as it should be. It's the best possible outcome out of a horrendous scenario, really, in history.
After 100 years, mate, we still remember your cobber.
As Australians, we're raised on the legend of Gallipoli, that heartbreaking story of mateship and glorious courage, of miserable defeat and retreat. But did you know that our boys were also responsible for one of the greatest successes of the First World War? The place was Belgium, and the architects were a bunch of larrikin Aussie miners. They were quite literally diggers. And they pulled off the biggest explosion in human history. It's a great yarn, and one that somehow became lost over time. Well, now the true story of Hill 60 is about to blast onto the big screen, finally granting our forgotten phantom soldiers their rightful place in history. Townsville, on the edge of the Great Barrier Reef, is a sunrise and almost a century away from the Western Front. But look again and listen as a dusty cow paddock just outside of town is transformed remarkably into the mud and the mayhem of a Belgian battlefield back in June 1970. This is the First World War as you've never seen it before. Fought 30 metres underground. Australian gold and coal miners digging their way beneath the German trenches. Their mission to set off the biggest explosion the world has ever known.
It was a psychotic war. The silence and the fear and the loneliness and the darkness and the paranoia. Anything.
These are the Phantom Soldiers, and their true story has been told in a new Australian movie.
Well, they could send us to Hill 60. What's Hill 60?
Beneath Hill 60 is based on the remarkable exploits of a Queensland mining engineer named Captain Oliver Woodward, starring actor and playwright Brendan Cowell.
Shush, you little bugger. You'll get us all killed.
I'm amazed by what these blokes did, just going further and further underground into this strange abyss. That added another dimension to the war. It wasn't just about killing them, it was about staying sane.
A million men would die around places like Passchendaele, the battle from the Seine Ridge, and in the trenches of the Western Front like this one, around Hill 60. This is where all the action was. This is where all the noise was. These were the killing fields. But down below here, about 30 metres down, there was a silent war going on, a cat and mouse game between the German and the Aussie diggers that would end the stalemate with an explosion that would change the war. The grand strategy was to blow a hole in the long wall of German trenches, which had until now proved impregnable.
53,000 pounds of a moral high explosive. 8,000 pounds of gun cotton.
It was really a war under the war. It was another type of war, fought by other troops, not the infantry soldiers, but the engineers. And it ended indeed in that cat and mouse game of mining and being undermined, of trying to intercept each other.
Frankie Boston is the director of the Passchendaele Museum, a war memorial to all those who perished here. Belgian-born and proud, Dr. Boston is as passionate as any Aussie about what our miners did in this place.
It really got forgotten because it was not really essentially the soldiers' war, it was the engineers' war. But to their masterpiece, very few things were done in recognition of that.
But this Australian masterpiece, as Frankie Boston calls it, came at a monumental price. Death at the hands of the Germans, or your own bad luck.
It must have been very fearful moments, knowing that if the tunnel collapses behind you, a tunnel of a few hundred meters long, you can never, ever get out.
Imagine what it must have been like. You're down here, right under the German lines, and you're in the dark, and it's an 8-hour shift, and the tunnels are infested with lice and with rats, and your clothes are dripping wet and they're caked in mud and you can't get warm. And then you start to dig a side tunnel, and it's only tiny and you're on your back, and you're pulling out 5 metres of mud and slush a day. And you're carrying explosives and you're terrified that you're about to be buried alive. And then suddenly in the silence you hear voices, and they're German voices. And that's the enemy, and they're tunnelling too, above you and below you and even beside you. So you stop, and suddenly a hole opens up, and you're face to face, and it's on for young and old. Armed with cut-down rifles and bayonets and bare hands, this was an absolute fight to the death.
There was a lot of horrific man-on-man combat in the tunnels. If they'd break through, you had to stab each other. And the way they'd work it out, they'd grab the epaulettes, because the Germans would have different epaulettes to the Australians. So that was one of the only ways you'd know, because you can't see anyone. Yeah, so you got a candle there, you got a bloke there, you're like, oh, I better feel his collar, just so I know whether to kill him. Oh, he's a German. There you go, I'll stab you, or I'll shoot you. And they go, no, that's one of my men, I better not shoot him, you know. And that's the way it was just insane.
How'd you know it wasn't me? Lucky guess.
Beneath Hill 60 has brought together some of our finest young filmmakers and our hottest actors, like Guyton Grantley, who switched from playing Carl Williams, the underbelly mobster, to Private Norman Morris, the underground miner.
It's just such a horrible, horrific place to live and be and exist, and it's just something you couldn't understand, something you couldn't fathom to do yourself. So I think the idea of them looking after each other, being their own family, is what got them through.
And action!
After months of shooting this $8 million movie in the claustrophobic tunnels of Townsville, award-winning actor and now director Jeremy Sims knows it's an untold, almost forgotten tale.
And action.
It was considered ungentlemanly, tunnelling under the German lines. So it wasn't a story that was publicised. It wasn't. They weren't considered heroes for doing it. Yeah. They didn't think people wanted to know about, you know, rats tunnelling under one another's lines and blowing up bombs in the dark. I think it was considered a dark art.
The extraordinary saga of the Hill 60 diggers lay pretty much buried until a nuggety ex-mining engineer from Queensland named Ross Thomas decided that their maverick exploits just had to be told, in a book he wrote and in this film.
It didn't have the romance of climbing over a parapet with a bayoneted rifle. It was out of sight, out of mind. It was dirty, unconventional, and military hierarchy frowned upon its activities. And I've been trying for quite a number of years to get this story brought to light.
It's a secret story, isn't it? It's a basic story.
Well, that's correct. Ginger, your short-barreled Lee Enfield, check clear.
Over almost 2 decades now, Ross has become the miner's unofficial historian and the film's chief consultant. Have you been accused of being obsessive?
Yes, the film crew definitely pulled me aside and told me to call my passion.
But I mean with family and friends for the last 15 or 20 years?
Yeah, I've lost a few friends over the years.
Why do you do it? Why have you kept going?
Interest in the heritage side of the tunnellers, the fact that I'm a miner myself, and the recognition is long overdue.
Raised around the Aussie pits and mines, from Kalgoorlie to Mount Isa, these blokes were much more independent, much older than the regular soldiers, with an average age of 42. Working underground earned them better pay, bigger rum rations, and animosity.
The sad thing was that within the army and the soldiers, they weren't incredibly respected. Because they went under the bags instead of over the bags, a lot of them were seen as cowards, like as sewer rats. But I think that actually takes an extra level of courage to fight a war underground than overground.
For the men of the Australian tunnelling companies, June the 7th, 1917, in the middle of the war, was their moment of truth. 500 tonnes of explosives packed under Hill 60, with many thousands of extra tonnes planted along the strategically important Messines Ridge, sparking 19 massive blasts that the British generals figured would be the beginning of the end of World War I.
500 feet down there is a Caterpillar mine. That one's 70,000 pounds. There's 21 of them.
At 3:10 in the morning, Captain Oliver Woodward, a miner from Queensland, blows up Belgium. An explosion so loud it can be heard in London.
Must have been a terrifying experience to hear the sound waves come across the English Channel and to find the trenches that had been squeezed shut as the shockwave went through the enemy lines, Germans standing at their posts frozen.
So it traumatised, it actually just left them...
Left them frozen, the ground had actually squeezed shut.
This is one of 2 hills here that were undermined by the Australians. So imagine this was a height where there were trenches, where there were fortified German positions with machine guns. And then here you see the result after that big explosion.
Wow, so it's all collapsed.
It was all collapsed. We're on the lip of the crater here. And the former German positions were, they describe it on the 7th of June like it was a kind of a mushroom that went open and burst open in flame.
Up to 10,000 German soldiers died in the space of 30 seconds. Those left standing either fled for their lives or went mad. And it would remain the biggest explosion in human history until atomic bombs wiped out Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945.
It's an incredible thing. I think when you are in here, the shock, the trembling, it's something the world had never seen. Also for the Australian tunnellers, who were about 400 meters away. Also for them it must have come as a big surprise, as something which they never imagined that would be the result of that.
Even as miners, they'd see things blown up,
yes.
but
not that powerful things. It's the first time. It's absolutely the first time.
It's hard to believe when you look down upon these Flanders fields that when the Australian mines exploded, followed by the biggest artillery bombardment in the history of warfare, that there was absolutely nothing left here. No church spires, no farm buildings, no trees, no animals, no crops. Absolutely nothing. It is one of the terrible ironies that this Australian-led operation, which devastated the whole countryside, is regarded as maybe the most successful of the whole war.
The explosion of the mines only killed the Germans in the front line, but the rest run away in panic to the second line and even to their third line. This made a way open for the attackers to capture the ground, to reach all their objectives with a limited number of casualties.
But just maybe we haven't heard the last chapter of this incredible story. Because the biggest, the nastiest memento left behind by the tunnellers lies buried beneath this pretty Belgian farm, a cavern full of high explosives that somehow failed to go off. So all these years later, it's still down there?
All these years later, still 10,000 kilo here, waiting for the trigger that never came.
What are we standing here for, Frankie?
Well, it's a part of our history.
Still, these Belgians have a soft spot for Australians. After all, it was the Aussie miners and engineers who stayed on after the war to help reconstruct their roads and their bridges and their public buildings. When the diggers finally came home, it was without fanfare or medals. These phantom soldiers have been unsung and unheralded until now.
And that's what's great now, and in a way this movie's kind of a symbolic medal that we can issue them and their families, you know, and I guess that's why a lot of us are in it. It's that lovely extra thing of, you know, maybe sending them to the great tunnel in the sky, you know, a little bit of a gift and a thank you.
And recognition at last.
And a recognition at last, yeah, absolutely.
It's one of the darkest, most heroic days in Australian history, yet it barely rates a mention in our history books. It all happened in the tiny French village of Fromelles. There, in the first battle after Gallipoli, nearly 2,000 young diggers died in a single, awful night back in 1916. But there's also an intriguing twist to this story. At least 170 Australians vanished that night without a trace. It's one of the great unsolved mysteries of the First World War. And now a couple of Frenchmen and a Greek-born schoolteacher from Melbourne are determined that it will not be forgotten. Determined to honour those who died on that faraway battlefield 90 years ago.
Gallipoli was a picnic. Here it was slaughterhouse.
There was a sacrifice and there was a bloody disaster.
Marshall, do you come back here at night and feel the spirits?
Yes, I feel, yeah. Lots of men gave their lives for our freedom and somewhere they're still there.
Here in the tiny town of Fromelles in northern France, life goes on much as it did a century ago. For 90 years, in the farmer's field that became a killing field, the ploughs have been turning up the past, turning up the bullets, the bombs, and the bones. Today, the last secret may soon be unearthed, the mystery of what happened to 170 young Australian soldiers who simply vanished from this First World War battlefield. Against impossible odds, they somehow scrambled their way into the German trenches, but were never seen again.
I could be obsessed. I've been accused of being a bit belligerent, but I think this is a question that needs resolution, and perhaps we can do now what should have been done on the 20th of July 1916.
Let's go, brother.
It was our first battle after Gallipoli, our first battle on the Western Front, and it was a complete, unmitigated disaster. A lunatic British commander ordered the battle as a diversion for a bigger one down the road at Pozieres. 2,000 diggers died in these killing fields, 2,000 men. Along with those slaughtered, another 3,500 diggers were maimed and wounded.
Fromelles was the worst day in Australian history, bar none. 5,533 casualties in one night. That was equivalent to the entire Australian casualties in the whole of the Boer War, the whole of the Korean War and the whole of the Vietnam War.
Combined?
Combined in one night at Fromelles.
A sense of perspective. If we look beyond the yellow flowers, that's where the Australians were coming, across no man's land?
Yes, no man's land. And the position of the Germans was roughly just in front of this house. So about 60 metres in front of this house.
Yves Verlaine is a battlefield guide come historian and a fiercely proud Frenchman. Preserving the role that Australians played at Fromelles, he regards as both an honour and a duty.
So I am here just to tell you that they didn't die for nothing. They died for my country and they give us freedom. So it's very emotional. I do apologise for that. Very emotional because their spirit is here. The Australian 5th Division waited on the low-lying farmland. The Germans waited high on the surrounding ridge, in their concrete fortresses. So from the top of this German blockhouse, you have a perspective of everything.
Why would 15,000 Australians think they could run up here with a bayonet and take this high ground?
So at this time it was a target and they didn't ask themselves this question. They were sure to succeed.
But men running across that field like that, it's a shooting gallery.
Yes, but they had been trained to attack, so they had to attack. Both sides knew that it was going to be an annihilation. Still, at 6:30 p.m, in the summer twilight, thousands of diggers got their battle orders to go over the top. They were our best and our brightest. Boys like Lance Corporal Victor Starr from Alexandria in New South Wales, Tom Hegarty from South Melbourne, Alex McKenzie from Talia in South Australia. Every hour after bloody hour, hundreds fell, dead and wounded. Stand here for a moment in the breeze and imagine what this peaceful, beautiful place must have been like. 90 years ago, almost to the day, this field here had been blown apart by heavy shells. There were craters gouged out of the earth everywhere you could see, and waterlogged ditches. There were high sandbag trenches about this high, and rolls of ugly barbed wire that cut the soldiers to pieces. And there were bodies everywhere you could see as well, or parts of bodies, that had been cut down just like a field of wheat. This was a muddy, bloody slaughterhouse. The French called it Fromelles. To the diggers, it was from hell. Tac, 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 machine gun, boom, explosions. All the time. The Germans had to stop this attack at all costs. So they were using all the steel they had. And this little area saw mechanical slaughter.
Mechanical slaughter?
That's right. Bodies, flesh against steel.
If we were soldiers and we're down here...
Yes.
We're still dead men.
Of course.
There's no protection,
Of course, of course.
You're a Frenchman. Can you understand why these men came 12,000 miles across the ocean to fight for your country?
No. For myself, it is a mystery, but it is so wonderful. It is the most beautiful Australian mystery. Yes. And just as mysterious is why Fromelles is missing from the history books and from the Australian War memorials, when every other battle is recognised and commemorated. Ross, as an historian, why has this been a secret? Worst day in Australian history, and yet we don't know about it.
I think the answer to that essentially lies in the cover-up that was put in place straight away.
By the British?
By the British.
It was absolute madness, and the truth is, the Australian generals went along with it.
The British put out a communique And General Haking, the commander most culpable in the whole exercise, he said afterwards he even felt that it would do us, it's done the Australians involved a great deal of good.
Down the hill, just below the church graveyard, is VC Corner. It's the only dedicated Australian graveyard in all the Western Front. And alongside it, this magnificent statue, Don't Forget Me, Cobber. It's a tribute to those diggers who went back into no man's land to rescue their mates.
Mateship for the Australians was everything. And they want to show to the French as well that they were here to liberate this superb, magnifique country.
Here in the cafes and on the cobble streets, there's a lasting Aussie connection. Now remember, the French lost 1.5 million men in the Great War. Yet remarkably, it's a couple of Frenchmen who are keeping the memory alive of the diggers who died here that hot July night in 1916.
That's the standard rifle for the Australians, the Lee Enfield rifle.
In the attic above the town hall is this, an extraordinary reminder of Australia's forgotten battle. So this is what the Australians had to come up
against? Yes, of course, it was largely used in the German army since 1940.
Is that, what was that, 600 bullets a minute?
I will say 500 per minute.
Yeah, 500 of these per minute?
Of these per minute.
Wow. Yeah. For Marshal Delabarre, it's been a lifetime's labour of love.
And that one is an explosive pattern of the 18-pounder shell employed by the Australian artillery during the Battle of Fromelles. They used about 75,000 of them during the Battle of Fromelles.
Marshall grew up in Fromelles, surrounded by the debris of war. The shrapnel, the shells, and the spirits of the dead.
We must not forget these young soldiers, and Fromelles is deeply linked with Australia. I think a strong link forged in the blood a long time ago.
Now, incredibly, some of the diggers made it through the first German lines down there beyond that tree. It was a mix of sheer guts and unbelievable luck, surviving the heavy German shells from over there into here, and machine guns here and here and here. Hand grenades and, of course, hand-to-hand combat. A few Australians, soldiers from the 14th Brigade, almost made it to this German bunker. If they'd have got here, they might have changed the course of history. They didn't know at the time that inside there fighting for his life was a young Austrian corporal named Adolf Hitler. The Battle of Fromelles certainly left its mark on Hitler. It was the first place he returned to in 1940 when the German army marched back into France. In the First World War, Adolf was just a 27-year-old soldier, running messages and dodging Australian bullets. It was a pity the Australian infantry didn't get him.
Yes, probably it would have changed the story of the world and history itself. Yeah.
So what happened to those brash, brave young Aussies who actually made it through the German lines? Well, over 400 were taken prisoner, but 170 just disappeared.
Here's a township of Fromelles, and the square of interest is square 17, and it indicates...
So you reckon they're buried here somewhere?
Yes.
For years, Lambus Glazos has conducted his own forensic investigation into the missing Australians. He's trawled through Red Cross records, through British and German files, maps and aerial photographs. And now he's convinced that he's found the missing men. He's convinced that their bodies were loaded onto German rail cars. That railway track came through the trees here. This area's called Pheasant Wood. Up there where the church is, well, that's the village of Fromelles. And thanks to the detective work, in fact the obsession of a Melbourne schoolteacher, the evidence now suggests that the Germans buried the men in mass graves. In fact, there was one just here, with about 60 Australians buried beneath our feet.
This is a British intelligence aerial photograph.
This one, yep, okay.
So here we go from here.
Yep.
We have the township of Fromelles is up here, which has been pulverised.
Here's the railway track.
There's the railway track, which cuts through the corner of Pheasant Wood. Now,
Lambus is an unlikely champion of these forgotten diggers. A Greek-born arts and crafts teacher, he's turned a passing interest into a passionate crusade.
And the Germans tell us, as in the Bowden file, the Red Cross file, that they buried them in 5 pits before Pheasant Wood. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
So why couldn't they be gun emplacements or farmers' diggings?
It's been suggested that they could be farmer dug, but we have aerial photographs taken of this site 2 weeks prior to the battle, and the area is untouched.
Okay.
No digging at all.
Thanks to Lambus, the federal government has reluctantly set up an inquiry to decide whether the field at Pheasant Wood should be dug up. That's the only sure way to find what lies below.
There has been active discouragement from a number of sources.
Army too?
Government. And I'd hate to think that our missing war dead are an inconvenience.
Whatever the outcome of this government inquiry, Lambus would like to see a cobber's statue in Australia like the one at Fromelles. Because for 90 years, that sad battle has been forgotten back home, but not in this corner of France. In a sense, you're the caretaker of all these Australians.
I will say, we must say to our Austrian friends, their soldiers are in good hands at Fromelles.
Sometimes when you are in Australia, you can visit some of your beautiful memorials, and the name Fromelles is not on the memorials. But here, we French people have not forgotten.
Lambus and Glezos is a most unlikely detective, but the Greek-born retired art teacher from Melbourne has already solved one of our great military mysteries. In 2008, Lambus located 250 missing World War I diggers, killed in the horrific Battle of Fromelles in France. For the past 4 years, he's turned his formidable skill to Gallipoli, where the bodies of more than 3,000 Australian men were never recovered. And Lambus believes he's found another mass grave with Australian soldiers. But as Peter Stefanovic reports, our government doesn't want to know about it.
We do have that moral obligation. If you can find your war dead, you've got to do it. It's not ancient history. It's very personal and very tangible. I believe we should. I believe we have a moral obligation to find and recover our war dead.
And the name of this village?
This is called Kojadere.
Kojadere.
Yeah.
Lambus and Glezos and John Basaran are on a mission to find a lost piece of Australian history.
He talks about shallow graves of few people, but he doesn't talk about these huge mass graves that...
It hasn't been easy.
I reckon that's where the dressing stations are down there.
Yeah. But more than 4 years of complicated research has now brought them to this farmer's paddock, where they say at least 140 Australian soldiers, missing for a century, lie under our feet.
I believe this is the area where the soldiers were buried, and I believe we should investigate this ground.
If you are correct, then we are standing on the mass graves of Australian diggers.
Yes, on the bodies of fallen soldiers.
This is a big thing.
It is a very big thing. It's a huge thing.
It's a little-known battle in the Gallipoli campaign which intrigues, even obsesses, Lambus and John. 2 weeks after the landing at ANZAC Cove, 3,000 Australians were sent south to the tip of the peninsula to reinforce British troops. It was a bloody battle for an insignificant village called Krithia and the high ground beyond it, but it should never have happened. What chance did they have?
Well, they had no chance. It was a futile attack. The fighting was intense. The intent was very strong. They would take these Turkish lines, but they were well defended, and it was an impossibility to get through the shrapnel fire, the machine gun fire.
Was it arrogance or stupidity?
I think a fatal mix of both.
Author Patrick Lindsay has nothing nice to say about the English general Elmer Hunter Weston, who ordered the Aussies into the fight for Krithia on the 8th of May, 1915. It has been labelled as contemptuous of fate, wanton slaughter and criminal negligence. That about accurate?
Yeah, I think so, because the commander, Hunter Weston, known as Hunter Bunter, a kind of a bunter figure in many ways, did the same thing with no success about 3 or 4 times.
Somehow, the Australian troops advanced about 800 metres through a wall of shrapnel and machine gun fire. Our diggers were mown down everywhere. And it was here, just beyond the Allied front lines, that was as far as they got. Now try to imagine, 100 years ago, bodies would have been scattered everywhere, many of the wounded crying out for hours for the help that never came.
Billy didn't have a chance.
Didn't have a chance, no, none of them had a chance.
Lance Corporal William Vernon Bowes was one of the soldiers who fell that day. His personal effects were eventually shipped home, but his body was never found.
So, you know, up in Gallipoli in the mornings when they had a bit of thing, he'd lather up with us and...
His great-nephew, Alan Grant, says 3 generations of his family have since lived with the torment of not knowing what happened to their Billy.
What were some of the things that the family wanted to know?
They just wanted to know where he was. They had no known grave. They had nowhere to go and mourn him.
Finding men like Billy Bowes is what drives John Bassarin and Lambis and Glezos.
Bob, I'm in trouble.
2 otherwise unlikely pals.
That looks very good, actually.
One's a lawn bowl-loving Greek Australian.
Oh! Well done.
The other...
In the sanctuary, there's a sunken marble.
A delightful Turkish Australian who regularly volunteers at Melbourne's Shrine of Remembrance.
They advance open ground, 600 yards or more of open flat ground. There's absolutely no chance at all.
Yeah.
Their bond is their outrage at what happened to the Australians at Krithia.
The missing of Krithia are calling us.
And an overwhelming desire to find out why most of the diggers who died in the battle were never accounted for.
What we're looking for is the creek and a dip in the ground.
Indeed, indeed.
They've spent the last 4 years going through official and unofficial records, and now they have the answer.
It is a perfect fit to the documentation we've seen.
Based on the figures, the numbers killed, the missing, but the documentation is very strong.
Makes my hair stand up, actually, that there's a calling that, you know, they're saying, come and find us.
Lambis and Glezos has impressive form when it comes to finding our war dead.
Here's a township of Fromelles, and the square of interest is square 17.
In 2008, he discovered the remains of 250 missing Australian soldiers, casualties of the equally costly Battle of Fromelles on the Western Front. Subsequently, those diggers were exhumed. More than half have been identified and now properly laid to rest by their families. How confident are you that the information here is as good as it was in Fromelles?
I'm confident.
You've had success before. Are you willing to put your name on the line again?
Reputation is not a factor. The work is too important to seek any sort of vindication. I'm very comfortable with my motivation in doing this. I believe that we have that obligation to find and recover our war dead.
How many times have you been here, John?
Probably 12 or 13 times.
The names of the ANZACs who died in the Battle of Krithia and whose bodies were never found have been carved into a British memorial at the very tip of the Gallipoli Peninsula. For Lambis and John, this is vital information, who they're looking for. 248 mostly Victorian men from the 5th, 6th, 7th and 8th battalions.
And this is the first clue, isn't it?
Yes.
248 missing Australian soldiers.
Where it says no known graves, I think that no longer holds true because we believe we know where they are. Can you see Bland and Ferguson?
With the names of the dead, Lambis and John's detective work took them to diaries written by survivors of the battle.
So through here,
and 2 stood out.
and that night we tried to bury some of our dead. A party of us put 57 in one grave.
The first by highly decorated soldier Captain Percy Lay, the second by Private Herbert Lloyd.
He says, a burial party went out and buried 86 in one grave.
Lay tells us clearly that under the cover of darkness they went out and brought in the bodies, and he and his team buried 57 in one grave. Lloyd accounts for another 86, he and his team. So under darkness they bring in the dead and the wounded.
The diaries confirm there was no time for proper burials. In the chaos of the fighting, the battlefield had to be cleared, and at least 143 of the dead soldiers were buried in 2 hastily dug mass graves.
Geez, young.
Yeah.
In all likelihood, one of those men is Lance Corporal Billy Bowes.
The family were never at peace, and they're such a close family, and he would never be at peace as a result of that.
Just by not having a grave causes that much anxiety.
A massive anxiety to them, yeah.
Throughout their whole lives.
Throughout their whole lives. This family, the Bowes family, have spent a lot of life thinking about Billy Bowes. Yep.
100 years on, there's still evidence of the Battle of Krithia.
This is a communication set connecting 2 or more major trench lines.
Supply trenches which were used to evacuate the dead and wounded.
I can also almost imagine people falling like flies.
How many bodies do you think were carried along here?
Must be in hundreds.
Hundreds?
Yeah, yep.
These trenches led to the only ground around here that provided any cover.
So far, is this matching your research?
Oh, yes.
And it's where John and Lambus say the Australian soldiers must have been buried.
And we come now to the dip in the ground, which provides the line of sight cover for the necessary work of burial.
The gravesite is about 20 metres square in a slight gully near the creek. It's where a medical post was set up to treat casualties during the battle.
No documentation has been found to indicate that they were ever recovered, so the soldiers, the Australian soldiers who were buried here, are still here.
Standing here, it's a peculiar feeling knowing there could be the remains of 143 diggers, young men who gave their lives for Australia barely a metre below us.
It's not just about the soldiers who went away to war and remain in foreign fields in anonymous dirt. It's also about the families back home who had to endure it. And there's every opportunity now that we can recover this site and restore some closure, give some closure to those families back in Australia.
After Lambus's success locating the graves in Fromelles, you'd think the government would be keen to act quickly on another potential discovery. But when he told them about Krithia 3 years ago, they ignored him. But last December, Lambus and John finally received an email which said, "We will not consider any ground search unless we are certain of finding remains." A classic bureaucratic brush-off.
I think he's proved that he knows what he's talking about. He's a charming, quiet steamroller, and he'll keep going until he gets there, because he's not driven by glory or money or any other motive other than to make sure that these missing diggers get a proper burial, and that, if possible, that they can actually be identified.
But there is that argument that the soldiers are at peace and the entire peninsula is a cemetery for the war dead.
That's true, but surely wherever we send our troops and put them in harm's way, if they die, if they pay the sacrifice that we've asked them to pay as a nation, it's incumbent on us to go back there, and if we know where they are, to go and find them and give them a proper burial.
Yeah. 8th Battalion, Lancashire and Manchester. Oh, look, that's a...
Having spent time with John and Lambus, there's no doubt they'll ever give up their quest to recover the missing ANZACs.
How many dead throughout the week?
And no amount of government obfuscation will stop them. Are you guys tired of each other's company yet?
Not yet. We have our moments, but we do a good job, don't we?
It's a solid team. And now, it all goes back to the original question, the moral dilemma, if you will. Should you actively seek your war dead? I believe we should. I believe we have the obligation to investigate that ground, confirm that ground, and recover that ground. Give these soldiers their dignity and, hopefully, their identity.
It was audacious, courageous, and it could have ended in disaster. But no, it was a triumph. You've probably heard of them, maybe seen the movies. The Australian Light Horse and their famous battle at Beersheba. On October 31st, 1917, they went on the attack against the Turks. 800 daring horsemen charging into immortality. It was a massive gamble, but it paid off and changed the course of the war in the Middle East. Now, 90 years on, the children and grandchildren of the Light Horsemen have returned to the Holy Land. And I was fortunate enough to be with them as they retraced the famous charge of their heroic forebears. It was late afternoon, nearing dusk. They started at a trot, but pretty quickly it became a full-blooded gallop. Into the Turkish guns, 800 Australian Light Horsemen charged. It seemed like sheer madness. But soon they were upon more than 1,000 startled Turkish soldiers. Within minutes, it was all over. The diggers had won the charge of Beersheba, one of our finest victories of the Great War.
It's got to be one of the great statements in Australian military history. It was a remarkable last-ditch, outrageously audacious.
90 years on, and at a much gentler pace, the Australian Light Horse has returned to the battlefield. Among them, relatives of those brave men, remembering the heroic fight their fathers and grandfathers won here in Israel's Negev desert. Your grandfather did this with bullets whizzing around his head.
Yeah, exactly. And attacking the Turkish trenches and that sort of stuff, I mean, it's hard enough to stay on a horse, let alone stay on it and get shot at as well.
Rob Unicum, a builder from Maitland, New South Wales, is the grandson of Trooper Ernest Paul. Riding next to him is Grant Pike, the great-nephew of Trooper Harold Seal. So your great-uncle and Rob's grandfather were very close.
Oh, close as anything. They were in the section of 4 men. You had to stay as a section for, the whole campaign.
Their regiment commander was Eric Hyman, the grandfather of another who's returned to Beersheba, Bill Hyman.
I'm very proud that he did what he did and that I'm his grandson. It does evoke a lot of emotions.
Well, you're doing your bit to keep your grandfather's spirit alive, Bill.
Absolutely, yep.
Which is a nice thing too, isn't it?
Absolutely, fantastic, yeah.
If only they knew.
Yeah, well, you never know.
I'm sure they do.
Yeah, you never know.
They'd either be clapping their hands or they'd shake their head saying, "What are you doing?"
These are the actual saddles they used back in 1917.
That's right.
They're not that comfortable, Brad. I can't really imagine galloping into battle with them, actually.
Well, the men who rode were used to a life in the saddle. The Australian Light Horsemen had to ride before they could join up.
Many of the Light Horsemen were farmers who couldn't wait to join up when the First World War began. They'd fought and survived the bloody stalemate of Gallipoli before being sent to Palestine to help the British overthrow the Ottoman Empire. But this was a different kind of war, fought on the run across vast stretches of desert. Military historian Brad Manera says the plan was to drive the Turks back through the Holy Land.
We forget that there were a huge number of Australians. You know, the bulk of our mounted force in the 1914-1918 war were deployed to Sinai, Palestine, and played an absolutely vital role in the Allied campaign, and that the Battle of Beersheba was an integral part, a vital part, a turning point in that campaign.
Who would have thought 90 years ago your dad was doing this for real?
It's hard to believe, but yes, he was.
He must be looking down at you at the moment, eh?
He'd be riding with me every step of the way.
Can you feel a real sense of them?
Yes, he's there.
Jim Mack is the son of Tenterfield farmer Rawdon Mack, a horseman long before he was a soldier, like all of those who charged at Beersheba. You must be very proud of your dad.
Oh, very, yes. Yes, very.
What makes you the proudest?
I don't know, just that he's my dad, I think. In those hills above the Jordan is a spot that e'er will be ever green within my memory, ever fresh and near to me.
While Rawdon Mack never much talked about the war, his touching diary entries give a true sense of the fear and sadness he and the other light horsemen experienced. He wrote this poem about fallen mates.
'Tis the battlefields of Amman, wind-swept hilltops drenched with rain, where the bravest men are sleeping, till the dead shall rise again. Till the last Trevally sounding wakes us all on Judgment Day. Then we'll meet them and we'll greet them and together march away.
Did a beautiful job of that, didn't he? What affects you most about that poem?
Oh, I don't know, I'm a pretty emotional type. And just the emotion of losing some of your mates. Sorry.
No, you're right.
But it's, you know, it's war, isn't it?
By October 1917, the war in the Middle East had become a brutal slog, bogged down on the southern border of the Turkish Empire. Desperate for a breakthrough, the British planned a major attack on the key town of Beersheba. They'd lay siege from the south and west, while the Australians would make the more dangerous attack from the east, across the open desert.
I can't imagine how gutsy, how big a risk these men were taking.
Imagine, if you can, how the light horsemen were feeling. 48 hours in the saddle, hardly any rest, and riding through the night to reach the stronghold of Beersheba just up ahead. They knew the Turks were dug in, heavily armed, and crucially in control of 17 water wells. And in open desert country like this, it was really easy for the enemy to see them coming. In short, the Turks held all the aces. The only thing the light horse had in their favour was their sheer bloody audacity. By 4 p.m. on October 31st, the battle for Beersheba was hanging in the balance. They had to take the town that day, or the whole expedition was doomed.
Unless we take the wells of Beersheba intact, we not only face defeat but a military disaster.
The biggest fear was the Turks blowing up the wells. So in fading light, the 4th and 12th Australian Light Horse Regiments were thrown into the fight.
It's going to be an empty victory unless they capture the vital water wells. The 17 wells of Beersheba are what the whole thing is all about.
No wells, no water, no victory.
No point. No point in taking the town at all. The men and the animals were going to die in the desert without those wells.
No wonder the wells at Beersheba were so important.
Absolutely, and that's what happened. It was the horses that could smell the water. They could smell it from miles away, so they were not going to stop. Once they put the spurs in, they were gone.
British cavalry advancing on the eastern flank.
They are not cavalry, they're Australian light horse.
The Turks can see these guys coming. and they're coming at the full gallop. I can't imagine what 800 times 4 sets of hooves sound like at the full gallop. That must have been a terrifying thing for the Turks, and I think that's where the answer lies, is just the sheer terror of being on the receiving end of 800 determined men.
Fire! 800 men on horseback could have been charging into oblivion.
Indeed. Trenches, rifle pits, machine guns, artillery. There are even 2 German crewed aircraft flying in support, dropping hand bombs, firing machine guns. It was a bloody and dramatic action, and confused and chaotic. But it was successful, and they took the town and they took the wells.
Amazingly, just 31 of the 800 light horsemen perished in the charge, and this week they were remembered.
This is absolutely the greatest charge ever made in the history of the campaign in this front, and will live in history forever.
For Rob Unicum, it was all the more emotional when Australian Ambassador James Larson read from his grandfather's diary.
Trooper Paul goes on to write, "Sad to relate, some of the best pals a man ever had went under."
After going to the graveyard, it's pretty emotional. Just reminded on how young the guys were and what they gave, and a lot of young men lost their lives doing what they believed in.
The losses were certainly not in vain. The victory at Beersheba paved the way for the Allies' ultimate victory in the Middle East. But even as they celebrated the end of the campaign, there was one final, heartbreaking loss to bear. The diggers had to destroy their beloved horses, the Australian-bred Whalers. Quarantine regulations prevented them being brought home.
But many of the Australians had seen the way the locals had treated animals and just couldn't bear the thought of their beloved comrades, the horses they'd soldiered with for years, that they owed their lives to, were going to be passed on to someone who may not value them as much as they did. And so in many cases, they shot their own horses.
That must have broken their hearts.
The remarkable stories. And again, stuff that you rarely hear in the official histories. And yet, speaking to a couple of the old diggers, and they said the regiment was out of control the week that we had to shoot our horses.
Waltzing Matilda, waltzing Matilda.
90 years after one of our nation's most daring, most unlikely military victories, it's been a very special experience for all of those who've come here this week, retracing the steps of the heroic horsemen who charged into history.
Waltzing Matilda, waltzing Matilda.
Who could write a script like that? It's a remarkable, remarkable event. And, they carried it off. I don't understand it. Perhaps that encourages the myth. But yeah, I think it's an extraordinary feat of arms, and one that deserves to be remembered for as long as there are Australians.
Waltzing Matilda, you come a waltzing Matilda with me. And he sang as he stopped there, jump up, give me start away. You come a waltzing Matilda with me. And his ghost that may be heard as you walk round by the billabong to see. You come a waltzing Matilda with me.
Hello, I'm Tara Brown. Thanks for watching 60 Minutes Australia. Subscribe to our channel now for brand new stories and exclusive clips every week. And don't miss out on our extra minute segments and full episodes of 60 Minutes on 9now.com.au and the 9Now app.